This story begins with a trial of divine punishment against the twilight of the gods, with a narrator recounting that every time humans face danger, they cling to a god, a Buddha, or any other deity. Meanwhile, we see a man being judged by hooded entities. As the votes are counted, the narrator asks them, what would happen if the one they asked for salvation were in danger? The count ends before the eyes of the captured man, who is sentenced to disappear. He immediately awakens in an open field, disoriented. He gets up, swearing he was sure he had died, or rather, dissipated, because death is only for mortals. And now, in that place, he tries to invoke the system, which completely fails, restricting his access. Therefore, he understands that his divine status was degraded, leaving him without his divine power. But with all his memories, confused, he sees a ship approaching. Atop it, a long-haired man recognizes him as the Twilight of the Gods, Lishanciono, throwing a scroll at him, on which he reads the protagonist's information, from his parents, his date of birth, to his journey to planet Arcadia in 2027, becoming an abominable god who destroyed many deities until his capture and trial. The smiling cowboy asks him if it is him. Shanciono's response is a direct attack, almost reaching his face. He dodges to unsheath his sword and attack him, being stopped by the protagonist with his bare hands, causing a large shockwave. The fight continues. The cowboy, with a slash, raises a huge wave to return to his ship. The protagonist continues walking on the water, ready to attack, until from the sky, hundreds of golden cubes descend, forming handcuffs that subdue him. These are made of divine suppression metal, leaving him at a level lower than a mortal, thus weakened and seeing himself in chains again. He wonders who he is facing. His rival introduces himself as Yule, the best reaper. That's enough for Chan to understand that he is in the underworld, specifically in the River Styx, where Yule explains that even being a god, he should not have escaped dissipation, which confuses the protagonist, who doesn't understand how he got there. The answer is that he was part of the jurisdiction, promising to tell him more as they travel. Chan, with no options, agrees to the journey. The Reaper tells him that Arcadia is very different from his place of origin, Earth, stating that due to jurisdictional issues, all humans live with a written destiny, which can only be fulfilled on that planet. Chan listens to this, surprised, since he was a special case, disappearing completely, being chased across all the stars, until being found in Arcadia, where he had caused chaos. Therefore, to capture him, they had to give up a lot. Chan remembers his past as a young drunkard, walking down the street, when a gigantic dimensional rift opened. In returning to the present, he asks again why they didn't let him dissipate. The answer will not be given by Yule, but by his boss. But to satisfy the protagonist's curiosity, Yule reveals his name, Thanatos, chief of Tartarus and servant of Hades, the king of the underworld. They arrive at some stairs in front of a temple, where they disembark, seeing how in front of them, a door opens, shining brightly, giving them a tour of hell, starting with the lowest part, the hell of the burning pit, where charred souls burn, then the ice hell, where they're frozen, and so on with other hells full of pain and suffering. Chan notices two enormous creatures carrying loads of gold, and asks what is special about them. Yule explains that those are abominable gods. In other times, they were gods of battles, seeing how these monsters continue to emerge, which are called fallen stars. These were sent by Thanatos, the one in charge of judging sins, and also of sealing demons and spirits. The protagonist, despite being a god, never heard of any of this. Yule understands, because death really doesn't give gods a good reputation, and so they reach the last phase, manual labor for minor sins, and in turn, they reach the end, a door where Yule asks for permission to enter. From within, an imposing voice allows them to pass, overwhelming the protagonist, who confidently believes this will be interesting. Now inside the palace, he sees the man sitting on the throne, very serious, who, smiling, has a question for the Twilight of the Gods. If he had lived on Earth, where does he think he would have ended up at the moment of death? The protagonist shrugs it off, until he's told that he will clearly go to hell. Now more interested, he asks why, going back to 2004, June 21st, when, as a professional gamer, he furiously yelled at his teammate so loudly that he made him cry, which, according to Yule, warrants at least a 15-day sentence. with his tongue ripped out in the tongue-ripping hell. Now, April 9th, 2024, he's told that he ignored a heartbroken friend's request with a broken heart just to keep playing a video game, warranting punishment. In the Mountain of Knives hell, the protagonist, starting to get nervous, sees how things like stepping on an ant, wetting the bed, and blaming others end up adding more painful punishments. Starting to worry, he continues to see how even things like having no talent for flirting add to his sentence, embarrassing him so much that he has to explode for them to tell him what the point is. With Thanatos laughing, he admits he was just joking, since his life on Earth was actually normal, unlike in Arcadia, where he fought like a beast. Chan then doubts why he saved him. The answer is that Thanatos has a job for him, to search for those gods who have broken the oath not to approach humans, sending the protagonist to Earth to protect them. He wonders if it's not a reincarnation, but for the god, it's more like a relocation. Using his power, he opens the firmament before his eyes, leaving him nostalgic as he sees the same Earth before him. The level of astonishment surprises Thanatos, who, instead of awakening emotions in the protagonist that he thought he lacked, sees him recognize that it is his home. With this, the king warns him that what follows might make him faint, causing the protagonist's mind to travel at full speed towards Earth, seeing himself still exhausted, walking drunk with a bottle in his hand through the street. As his mind returns, the protagonist asks him not to send him there, but the god has already made his decision. That is his punishment, to focus on the vassals. Thanatos doesn't understand why they're giving him this opportunity. The god replies that he is a skilled hunter, seeing that both Arcadia and others have broken their word, being the reason why the dungeon break occurred that took the protagonist away from there. With this, he understands that the gods of Arcadia want to take Earth. Thanatos sees how they are slowly approaching, and even if he wanted to, he couldn't intervene because of the oath, since he has no reason to. However, he can involve humans in his plans. Chan understands that he wants him as a house dog, but fears that after helping him, he will kill him anyway. Thanatos, smiling, promises him that he will not be punished, and that once he completes the job, he will get him a new life. This doesn't seem to convince the protagonist, so the god changes his speech, suggesting that he can't force him to seal the gods, but he can offer him a deal that piques his interest. The reward will be authority, something Chan doubts he can give. The king is sure he can do it, convincing the boy and sealing the deal. Thus begins the regression, the doors opening, leading to rebirth, towards which a confident protagonist goes. Later, Yul and Chan, with the former, reminding the protagonist that he will return to Earth as a human, with the risk that if he is detected by the gods, he will be locked up again. Chan complains about the whole explanation. Just as they reach a huge door, this being the exit and the time to leave, the excited protagonist jumps saying goodbye to Yul, hoping to see him again someday. Yul agrees with him, reminding him before he leaves that he is still a deceased with the power of a king. Passing through the door, Chan enjoys the freedom of a gigantic free fall, in the midst of which he receives the authority and therefore the powers of an administrator. Finally arriving on Earth, he awakens disoriented, in the middle of a field surrounded by people and kisses, memories intact, which is an achievement for the system. Meanwhile, the rest of the people are terrified of the dungeon. The protagonist recognizes that he has returned to Korea. He gets up in the middle of a gigantic circle, in an even larger forest, in a barrier-protected area. With this, he remembers that Thanatos told him that he couldn't return him to Earth, since he would have to evade the gaze of the gods. So he left him, in the middle of a dungeon full of scared people. This is the Pink Forest dungeon, where there are more than 400 players, not counting the protagonist, who slightly bugs the system to include himself. Then they're given their mission, which is supposed to be appropriate for their strength. The theme is recovery. They must defeat all the monsters in the forest until they reach the benevolent cliff, passing through the 5 sections of the forest, where there are different creatures and methods to defeat them. They're given an inventory each, as well as a status window and skills, in addition to a mini tutorial, which Chan doesn't need. He stretches next to a terrified little girl, who notices him watching her. Curious, she watches as he starts the trial, and is the first to run straight into the forest. To everyone's surprise, they slightly manage to recognize him by the name Tyrant. Now in the middle of the forest, the protagonist, almost breathless, is frustrated by his lack of stamina. Looking at his status window, which glitches until his administrator qualities are restored, slowly starting at level 0 with some skills given by Thanatos, like soul extortion, which allows him to absorb the souls of his victims and burn them in the flames of purgatory, gaining vitality and strength in the process. He can use this when he destroys a monster to increase his experience, stamina, and health in addition to extracting information. The other skill is the Executioner's Sword, with which he will execute divine punishment on criminals who have broken the pact. These can only be used against gods, also allowing him to take their authorities. He can take as many as he wants and achieve omnipresence, and he feels that he wasn't cheated in his deal with Thanatos, to whom it was surely very difficult to give him those skills. This reflects the hatred he has for the gods. Despite being very good skills, they're also very restrictive, because the sword only works against those who break the pact, whom he can't even think of defeating yet. Seeing it as useless, he decides to seal it for the moment. Just as he sees a black mamba detect him, going into defensive mode, he takes out his beginner's dagger, attacking the creature and splitting it in two. He easily achieves victory, gaining skills and leveling up, being observed by a divine entity. This is the moment when Chan decides to be the best newbie. At that moment, we're given a little explanation about dungeons, which for humans have become a kind of natural disaster, but from which they saw the possibility of new beginnings. The gods noticed this and used the dungeons to select candidates, for priests or clerics, to spread their gospel, and apostles to promote their will, needing humans to increase their power. However, thousands could die in a dungeon without these haughty beings noticing any of them, seeing them simply as perishable beings. Very few would meet their requirements, and so we return to the protagonist, who receives the interest of a benevolent constellation. Hunting season. The protagonist considers this a jackpot, as he remembers Pavelzak, the real name of the constellation, considered the goddess of war, who enjoys hunting. But the prize is not her, but her mother, Tiamat, a primordial evil dragon. So Chan shows off his dagger techniques to impress the goddess, who wants to see more. This makes the boy happy, and he's ready to impress her. Thus, he walks through the enormous forest, where he encounters a trail of poisonous gas. Remembering that most of the monsters in that area are poisonous, he changes his plans. Just then, two mambas appear behind him, which pleases the protagonist, who decides to go for the title of Snake Hunter. He easily destroys the creatures with a single dagger slash, gaining experience points. Repeating the process, he easily finishes off more snakes, clearing the area in record time. Continuing like this, he cuts down monsters and increases his attributes, causing such a massacre that even these creatures begin to fear him, wanting to avoid combat. This amuses Chan, who will go after them anyway, easily destroying them. He manages to earn the title Black Mamba Exterminator, eliminating 100 of them and entering a homicidal rage, enjoying the feeling of eliminating his enemies in battle, a feeling that reminds him of all the chaos he caused in Arcadia, instilling terror in the gods, which ended up triggering his divine judgment, because he unbalanced the world. But for him, that's just an excuse from the cowardly gods, who were surpassed by a mortal. Continuing his massacre, he remembers that although at that time, he didn't intend to eliminate these beings, now he is determined to do so. And so he goes, running over the corpses of hundreds of mambas, achieving a power-up in his dagger techniques, surprising the constellation observing him. The protagonist sees the opportunity to try something, using his soul extortion ability, extracting the souls of his victims, activating the flames of purgatory, concentrating the power in his hand and recovering energy, to then continue his hunt, absorbing souls as he destroys more creatures, surprising the constellation with such a strange ability. Chan calmly knows they would never suspect he has the ability of the underworld, since everyone would assume that technique came in his awakened package. And continuing with his hunt, he doubts the constellation wants to see his status window, and if they wanted to, they would, but he trusts that the underworld has a good system to defend against that. And after a long, exhausting time, he finishes off the last Black Mamba, leveling up and receiving the title of Serpent Hunter. The protagonist sees his status window, amazed at his rapid growth, quickly acquiring magical abilities that could be useful for his own techniques. And with the constellation's interest increasing, it's the protagonist who decides to move on to the next part of the mission, the blood mambas. And seeing that he can now tolerate the poison better, although he knows that for a novice, it's crazy to face those monsters, and even worse if it's solo. But Chan not only seeks to impress the gods, but also wants the blood fong, an item that can make him immune to poison, remembering that it was precisely because of the poison the reason why he was defeated, since he could deal with being outnumbered. But his greatest weakness is being vulnerable to poison, falling under Jia's curse. So this time he will counteract this. And just at that moment, his dagger disappears due to excessive wear, leaving him weaponless, until a gigantic sword falls from the sky, with dragon scale patterns, which the protagonist identifies as a weapon of Tiamat, sent by the constellation, as a gift and a wager. However, if he doesn't win the bet, he will be eliminated. Now confident, despite the fact that he could die, he remembers how the gods and constellations play with humans, this being one of the reasons why he hates them. But he is grateful that everything is different for the better. Wielding his new sword, he remembers that if he manages to get the dragon's head, it will be a great trophy. Accepting the bet from the good seasoning house, which according to the system, is amused by his bravery, giving him his first mission. Meanwhile, the civilians are still in the circle, receiving orders from a subject they initially think is just someone wanting attention, until he introduces himself as a C-rank awakened named Park Jae-song, who like a good soldier, takes the lead, being accepted by everyone. They are reassured to have a player like them. However, they're still worried about Chan, who ran into the forest from the beginning, with everyone assuming that what he is looking for is money. This is overheard by a long-haired man, who, annoyed, reveals to the group that the protagonist doesn't need money, revealing his identity by the nickname Tyrant, who was recognized as a popular professional gamer. According to him, he was raised like a golden cockroach, and now sees the risk he took as even more illogical. The long-haired man clarifies to them that Chan is an alcoholic, who surely saw the opportunity to unsubscribe from life himself, upsetting everyone. Just then, his friend tells him not to exaggerate the situation. Before continuing, the system informs them that all the black mambas have been eliminated, as well as many other monsters, leaving everyone astonished. And even more so when the system recognizes Chan as the hunter. This makes the long-haired guy very upset. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues on his way, absorbing souls, and remembering that the constellation is looking for new recruits, having to rummage among the newbies. This led him right to him, who is sure that he is being sought as a future apostle. He understands that this sudden interest is due to the fact that, at that time, the confrontation between the dragon Tiamat and the constellation of Taurus, Bel Marduk, the most powerful of the 12 constellations, occurred. Chan concludes that if that's what they think, he can get much more out of the situation. And now he observes his new sword, Wicked Dragon's Cunning Tooth, which he sees as useful, despite having all its abilities restricted, since it's only alone. However, with this, he could have achieved his objective, but it's not enough for him. He raises the stakes with the constellation, who listens confused, seeing Chan's insistence. He promises to finish off the mambas in just 30 minutes, to entertain them even more, in exchange for a better reward. The constellation gives in, warning him that if he fails, it will eliminate him with great pain. The protagonist calmly accepts, launching himself at full speed through the forest. He quickly encounters a giant worm, which he easily dodges, jumping on it to tear it to pieces. Then he has to deal with pterodactyls, which he also eliminates easily, showing off his skills. This causes the rumor of the bet to reach the other gods, who start to follow the game, interested in how the protagonist continues to destroy monsters, until he reaches his main enemy, the Blood Mamba, with more interested gods joining the broadcast, causing the hunting season to claim the protagonist as its own. Meanwhile, Chan hides from the Mamba, gloating about getting the attention of the gods, and reaching level 10, no longer a newbie, and unlocking the class selection, remembering that in the past he started as a spider wilder. However, now he sees potential in other classes, although he really knows which one he needs. For this occasion, Berserker, the class with the highest attack power. Despite the risk of losing his mind, he decides to take the risk, remembering that the Mamba is a difficult monster, even for level 20 players. He happily highlights the selection. However, when he goes down and checks all the classes, he becomes increasingly worried, since no matter how much he searches, the Berserker class doesn't appear. Now nervous, he hides from the Mamba. His only plan failed, and now he carries the interest of the gods, eager to see his next move. Chan has few options, specifically only one, the Rune Guardian class. Although he considers drawing a nuisance, it's a class with great destructive power. Selecting it, the process begins, increasing his attributes, in addition to new intelligence and willpower stats, as well as the engraving skill and lower grade rune production. Despite the fact that this seems like a cause for mockery among the gods, the confident protagonist sees his orbs with two new abilities. One that allows him to generate runes, and another that allows him to bestow them. This is enough. Using them, there are boosts in willpower and intelligence. Now, with only 4 minutes left, he must execute his plan. Just when the Mambo appears, attacking him, he barely escapes and starts running. Activating his skills, making a small cut on his hand, he uses his own blood to write on the sword, remembering how the skill he was forced to learn by his grandfather is saving his life. Now the system indicates that the engraved rune, the explosion rune, and the sword begin to flash. The hunting season's curiosity is at its peak, as the sword's power increases with each second. Seeing the explosion 5 times stronger now, the protagonist, with only 3 minutes left, faces the monster, running towards it and screaming with all his might in the middle of the great forest. Resounding, a huge explosion that amazes the others in the dungeon, especially the C-rank hunter, who hears how said explosion. From there, the large plume of smoke rising from the forest, and the system announcing that Chan has started the raid against the final boss, the Blood Mamba, astonishing everyone present. This worries the long-haired man, who demands that the soldier do something, or everyone will die. Furious because he considers the protagonist selfish, the soldier just asks him to calm down and return to his position, arguing that it's safer for him to die if he doesn't follow his orders. But in reality, he's thinking about how he's seen the protagonist easily clear the first part of the dungeon. Seeing the point they're at, he thinks he could, perfectly, witness the birth of one of the 10 kings. Just then, the Blood Mamba enters the safe area, terrifying the players, until they see that it's just Chan, dragging its corpse. Noticing that everything is still there, he addresses Jason, asking him that the players take care of the small monsters that remain. The soldier offers to prepare a place for him to rest, but the protagonist understands that they are not comfortable with him, and withdraws, dragging what's left of the Blood Mamba to rest alone. Everyone is surprised to see that the tyrant's reputation precedes him. Some even compare him to a demon. Despite at least seeing that everyone survived, all this leaves the long-haired man annoyed. Meanwhile, the protagonist himself remembers people's words, actually agreeing with the part about looking like a demon, considering that he will have time before the second wave of monsters appears. He will take the opportunity to rest, engraving runes, to form a shield around him and his prey, to calmly sit down and check his rewards. There are 2 for the dungeon and 3 for the subjugation quest, giving him the option to choose the reward. Loot, skill, item, effect, and points. The protagonist, smiling, sees this and realizes that it's easy to get achievements at a low level. Feeling that he is comfortable with his current weapon, he prefers to just choose the points, obtaining 15 points, remembering that the only thing he has in common in the human and god worlds is that the rich always win. So he decides to accumulate a lot of points for when the shop opens. Now he sees his status window with his new skills, Poison Tolerance and Snake Eye. Acknowledging that it was useful to kill the Mamba alone for that, the system notifies him that the evil dragon's tooth will be his first reward, also indicating that many other gods and stars will appear interested in the protagonist, but the house will not let them touch what's theirs. This makes the protagonist feel wanted, until he receives his second reward, giving him the choice between the gold bar of Anadison, Celestial Chalcedony, and Mammonite Stone. He is amazed to see so many options. It seems that the great season of the house is very interested in having him on their side. However, he knows that he cannot settle for something like that, or he will be looked down upon. So he lets the time run out, upsetting the goddess, and also confusing the others as the system changes the reward to achievement points. Exactly what the protagonist was looking for. Oh, Now, the goddess asks him to accept the apostle candidacy. Upon being rejected again, that candidacy transforms into achievement points, increasing by more than 2 million points, achieving his goal. But now, the goddess is furious for being ridiculed, while the rest of the gods are left with doubts about their interest in him. And seeing that the more he plays hard to get, the more attention he attracts, he understands that the goddess doesn't have many other options. So he mocks her, seeing that she literally threw a tantrum after being rejected. Feeling that he's done with this, he moves on to the next part of his plan, starting to extract as much product as he can from the mamba, while the gods observe his next move. Meanwhile, in the starting circle, the long-haired boy tells his friend that he wants to be a player. Seeing how an alcoholic made it, he becomes serious and challenges the god's messages to test his talent, receiving a response from the divine god, Buju, who pierces the twilight, showing interest in the boy named Hien Chonghaya, who anxiously sees this opportunity. Meanwhile, very close by, a gigantic yellow flash falls, sending humans flying. This is an administrator named Gerald from the Korean channel, who is literally an animated bunny. Smiling, he makes everyone uncomfortable, so he apologizes for disturbing them during their rest, understanding that they must be very curious about his appearance, explaining that something awkward has happened in the system. Everyone, puzzled, listens as the rabbit tells them that, although he doesn't like to intervene, the excessive increase in views of that dungeon has worried the administration. So, apologizing maliciously, he decides to increase the difficulty of the game, terrifying everyone, breaking the safe zone, increasing the aggressiveness, and also the strength of the monsters. Everyone is incredulous except for Jason, who begins to have terrifying memories of when he experienced that last time, remembering himself wounded before the hundreds of corpses of his companions. Thinking that like that time, the gods also increased the difficulty of the dungeon in search of an exceptional rookie, seeking them to be their apostles. Fearing that they might think Sean is that person, he is distressed to think that it will happen again. How many people will sacrifice themselves? Seeing what the mission was, it will be a team of 10, in which they must place 99 fire pearls to move on to the next stage, which they obtain by defeating monsters. Everyone is terrified with 5 seconds left to start. They grab the few weapons they have at hand. Meanwhile, the terrifying version of the bunny appears behind Jason, greeting him. Terrified, he asks how he knows who he is, and the bunny clarifies that the administration is watching him, since he survived the evil dragon's dungeon. So he tells him that he will pray for his safety. Just as the countdown reaches 0, and the wave of monsters launches their attack, everyone runs in terror. Others try to confront them, but no one seems to have a chance. Then John appears, running confidently, thinking it's his chance. Now that he has the blessing of the constellation, he launches himself against the monsters. Meanwhile, the protagonist finishes extracting the venomous fong from the mamba, happy to be getting closer to poison immunity. When he is alerted that the second stage has begun, the gods are waiting, eager to see his performance in this phase, and he recognizes the chaos as something they call the filtering. Now, with no time to rest, he sees his stats, which according to him, are pathetic, and his resistance is the worst. So he was thinking of resting to recover. Having failed at that, he runs to the battlefield, being intercepted by fire lizards. Seeing that first he had to deal with organic poison, and now with fire poison, he notices how the lizard leaves him behind. To get in front of him, observing the lizard head-on, he launches himself into the attack, determined to accumulate as much fire energy as necessary, slashing the monster over and over again without it being able to defend itself, until he has to dodge a large burst of fire coming from the lizard's breath. With his speed, he dodges and descends to land a blow to its head, from which a gigantic amount of fire erupts. As soon as the lizard falls, Chan is victorious, although somewhat tired. He proceeds to check the monster's head, finding a fire crystal inside. Without thinking twice, he swallows it, acquiring fire resistance and accumulating fire energy. Belching flames, he decides to now begin his search for fire crystals, this being the first step to immunity. The second is the heat energy from the 8 trigram zern. he launches himself at a pack of lizards, upon noticing that he can obtain the necessary embers from there. What the protagonist seeks is the invincible skill, a unique technique of Antares, constellation of Scorpius from the 12 zodiac signs, an old enemy of Chan. This skill grants invulnerability to all poisons, as well as the ability to create poisons from his blood. With it, Antares managed to control the most powerful version of Chan, subduing him with Jia's curse and defeating him, never imagining that he would end up in the underworld, where the protagonist would learn part of the secret arts of the fallen stars, thanks to Thanatos, with the intention of using them against the zodiacs. They say that the fallen stars were ancient beings who were judged as criminals and sent to the underworld. In this way, the 12 zodiacs positioned themselves, making several of these stars their enemies, said stars that Chan came to know as the 10 elders, who gave him their teachings, remembering how he attentively listened to the elders when they began their first lesson, the shortcut to invincibility. This lesson he would receive from a fallen star, who felt resentment towards Antares for taking his daughter from him. The protagonist named this man the First Elder, and while in the present, Chan gorges himself on fire crystals, resting on a lizard, but thinking that this power is not enough. So he moves at full speed, looking for stronger rivals. Meanwhile, John seems to be doing a good job, killing monsters, confident in being able to surpass the protagonist. However, upon seeing the dungeon ranking, he discovers that he is completely far from the protagonist. Frustrated, he thinks that he used some kind of trick, and with the suggestion of the divine being of Twilight. With censored letters, John agrees to use tricks and asks for more power. Meanwhile, Jason stands with a group of men, seems to have survived a large wave of monsters. The soldier notes that after 3 days, the men are increasingly tired and envious of his power, something he understands, since 2 normal individuals became very strong in a matter of time. Just when Chong returns, euphoric, full of adrenaline and blood, claiming that God answered his prayers, providing a method for everyone to become players and survive. Meanwhile, a gigantic fire deer approaches at full speed, straight towards the protagonist, who easily dodges and finishes it off to remove and devour the crystal. And while listening to a sound, he turns around and sees the little girl from before, terrified, being attacked by a bear, which ends up being destroyed by a blow from the protagonist. The girl, however, cries even more when she sees the protagonist, thinking he is a monster. This affects him a bit emotionally, until he manages to calm her down to ask about the others. The girl states that everyone, even her friends, are no longer alive, abandoned by Chong, before the serious gaze of the protagonist, who observes how the girl shows him a seal on her arm, which, according to Chong, was capable of sharing the power of the Twilight Owl. But Chan immediately notices that it is only a demon seal, which absorbs the vitality of the soul of the person who carries it when they die, and giving it to the demon's host. That host is now the demon Chong, who the protagonist believes has become very strong. However, his biggest concern is that the mark is of too high quality, believing that it comes from a demon that surpasses even the Demon King. With this information, the protagonist leaves, thinking it will be a problem, leaving the girl alone. She quickly yells and runs at full speed after him. Chan, clearly not being good with children, pushes her away with some disgust, telling her that he already did a lot by saving her, but she has no intention of letting him go, promising to be his helper in exchange for his help in becoming stronger. The girl's determined gaze catches the protagonist's attention. He thinks that perhaps her desire for revenge is what motivates her. The girl, in noble response, offers him, through tears, to convince him her last candy. He, uncomfortable, doesn't want the candy, but seeing her insistence, he ends up agreeing to help her, making the little girl happy. But first, he must edit that demonic mark. Meanwhile, Chong continues to receive the vitality of those who die with the mark, becoming increasingly stronger and crazier, making the now nameless constellation proud, until his friend tries to talk to him, receiving a terrifying look that makes him back away. He keeps to himself the feeling of restriction that the mark is causing him. Meanwhile, Chong continues to act crazy, scolding a subject who apparently he had sent to look for something that this time he did find. His friend feels like a slave, cursing Chong, who forces him to move forward to carry out a boss raid, planning to humiliate the protagonist, as he felt humiliated by him. The little girl runs at full speed among the whirlwinds, seeing the system messages, which indicate that many gods are watching the event. Meanwhile, she escapes from zombies, which are captivated by a rune she carries, allowing Shang to get easy kills. Doing the same with the ghouls, remembering that part of the deal with the protagonist was that he would engrave the captivation rune on her, so that it would distract the creatures. He suggested that she just run among them without looking back. Returning to the present, the protagonist sweated a bit. After eliminating so many zombies, when the little girl, very excited, reports that she finished her task. With a bright look, she asks if he needs anything else, and the answer is, get out of there at full speed or you'll be in danger. She, with her bright eyes, agrees and runs at full speed, leaving the protagonist alone, who feels overwhelmed by the little girl. But he moves on to the next part of his plan, feeling the poison of the final boss approaching. The decomposed plague spider. It violently attacks the protagonist, who barely dodges, seeing how much of the terrain is destroyed, causing the little girl to look back again, encountering the enormous spider that Chan is about to face. Activating his reptile eye, hundreds of decomposed zombies and violent ghouls make up the spider's body, which roars, surprising Chan, who resists the wind blast. Meanwhile, another constellation seems to have an interest in him, the serpent that envelopes the ending world, granting him a benefit, temporarily changing his snake eyes to viper eyes. Temporarily. This improves his observation and intuition skills, and by not receiving any conditions, he sees it as a challenge he is willing to accept, using it to detect a weak point on the spider, activating his poison resistance, and starting to charge his fire breath, which he ingests to purge the poison in his body, thus smiling and engulfed in flames. He sees the result of consuming so many orbs, improving his fire resistance and strength, thus beginning his attack, cutting off one of the monster's legs as it screams in pain. The protagonist does not plan to stop, thinking of finding something burning for his plan, passing by the monstrous legs, full of monster corpses, which he continues to cut, while searching for the creature's most powerful poison, which is in the spider's glands, jumping so that from the air, he can detect the glands near the heart, and he heads straight for them, only to bounce off comically, seeing that he cannot pierce the skin, from which several zombie heads emerge, spitting acid, making him retreat, very tenacious and determined. Knowing that the level he has achieved so far is insufficient, he decides to use his best strategy, run away. Chong and the group pass by a bunch of destroyed zombies, confusing their moronic leader. He checks the ranking, only to see that he's not just a little below the protagonist, but that he's being crushed. This also angers the false divine being, who threatens him for making his name look ridiculous, terrifying his servant, and warning him that he only has one chance left. He, biting his finger until it bleeds, doesn't understand how someone can become so strong in such a short time, seeking the god's approval again, trying to come up with an idea, just when he receives the notification that the protagonist is facing the spider boss. With this, he decides to go after him. Returning to Chan, he continues to escape from the furious spider. Seeing this, he remembers his small and lively helper when she told him she had finished, and tested all the preparations he had entrusted to her. Returning to the present, the protagonist stops, waiting for the spider, which, taking one last wrong step, ends up falling into a trap according to the boy's plan. And now he is smiling, watching it fall straight into a large hole full of explosive runes that begin to glow, causing a huge explosion, burning the spider, which increases the amusement of the divine serpent being. But the battle is not over yet. The protagonist uses the penetration rune to pierce the spider. Determined, he jumps into the hole to go after it, confident that this is only the beginning of his traps. The spider roars in pain, barely holding on to avoid falling further, and the protagonist arrives smiling, seeing the excess of blood. He feels sure that he is facing the final boss, dropping more spikes on it. The injured beast lunges as far as it can to escape. Chan doesn't intend to allow this, jumping towards it to drop more spikes, which impact strongly. This is seen through the canyon by Chang's group, leading them into battle, only to be left, astonished by the fight between Chan and the spider. Therefore, he understands that he can't do anything, even if they all attack together. So he hopes that both of them will be more worn out. But the protagonist doesn't seem tired at all, which worries Chang, who nervously continues biting his finger, planning to throw some people to weaken him, and his plan gets better. According to him, seeing that the protagonist wouldn't harm normal people, seeing the large number he has at hand, who don't know the fate he plans for them, and he believes it would be even better if he had a hostage. Luckily for him, he finds just what he needs. When he sees the little girl running among the whirlwinds, she carelessly stares in amazement at the protagonist's fight. He's surprised, thought the little girl was already dead, unless the protagonist had saved her, which means he now has another move. Meanwhile, the protagonist is focused on attacking the monster, reaching its head, where, with a single movement, he plunges his sword, causing a critical hit. And with another movement, he shatters the spider, defeating it and claiming his prize, the poison glands, which he ends up devouring in one bite, with excessive enthusiasm. And now he feels the effects inside, leveling up and falling to his knees, while expelling a large, excessive amount of poisonous smoke, standing in front of the spider's corpse, finally completing the mission, clearly in first place in the dungeon, receiving good rewards from the administration office, and the interest of many gods, among them the serpent constellation, who mocks the others, reminding them that he was the first to help him. All of this happens while he is still on his knees, with Chong and his slaves lurking, waiting for the moment to attack. Seeing that the protagonist is too tired, Chong takes advantage and sends his minions to attack, while he hides among them. However, he stops dead in his tracks when he sees a gigantic smile on Chan's face, with the system indicating that Chong's large group fell into a trap. Chong, not understanding what it means, watches as the false divine being laughs at this, and the protagonist clarifies that they are now screwed. The protagonist waits for the ambush. Calmly and effortlessly, he ends up injuring everyone according to his new mission. Escape the ambush. Everyone is terrified, and the false divine being is very interested. The protagonist eliminates everyone around Chong, leaving him alone against him. Chong tries to charge, but ends up with his arm injured and a wound on his shoulder. Luckily, Chong manages to escape, barely, sending more servants against him. They are easily eliminated. Terrified at seeing that he cannot defeat the protagonist, he needs more power. Meanwhile, from above, Sen observes the massacre, understanding that Chong was just a mere toy to be used against Chan. Now desperate, Chong eliminates his own slaves, who scream in pain at being betrayed. The soldier concludes that Chong is a mere ornament for the protagonist's tutorial, seeing that it was the same as what he experienced. But Chong still trusts in the power of the fallen that reaches his body, which works, but he is surprised by the protagonist, who launches himself at him at full speed. Unable to block him, he ends up receiving a large cut on his shoulder, and with one more movement, the protagonist rips off his arm. Everyone watches as, from the arm, essences begin to disperse and head towards the protagonist. The demonized boy, confused, goes imposingly towards Chan, who seems to be trying to remember where he knows him from, until he seems to remember. But this further agitates the demonized boy, who reminds him that because of the protagonist, he was kicked off the team. Chan now seems to remember something like a boy, whining and complaining about not being listened to, with an attitude that he found so unsightly that it ended up bothering him. This enrages him, claiming that he is different now, since he has his own god on his side, even though this one mocks him to his face, seeing him as a worthless being. The imposing protagonist confronts the humiliated Chong, who cries at seeing himself again as a secondary character. While the protagonist prepares his sword, Chong remembers how in the past, seeing him as a champion, he shouldn't have envied him or followed him to attack him, reflecting that that was the reason why he came to that door, blaming the protagonist. However, the protagonist, with a single movement, eliminates him, with the announcement that the cursed player has fallen. Chan simply moves on. Now on the ground, Chong begins to expel all the absorbed power from his body, which according to the stigma contract, must return to the host. However, to everyone's surprise, it goes directly to the protagonist, who begins to concentrate all the energy into an orb. Seeing that it is so much that it will take him a while, he remembers again when he was with a little girl, carving the cursed seal with a monster knife, and telling her that he left it balanced, so that she could be a host like Chong. However, all the power she received could eliminate her, so he created a different rune, so that the energy would go directly to him. The serpent that wraps the world suggests that he take his time absorbing that power. Meanwhile, The protagonist painfully absorbs all the energy, admitting that it's much more than he expected, although of very low quality. Meanwhile, the nameless divine being confirms what the protagonist already knew, that Chong was a simple test for him. However, Chong doubts who this hidden god is, who now seems to want to give him a reward. He manifests himself at that moment, with all the survivors, being impaled by the marks of his hand, presenting to Chong as a gift the life energy of all of them. For his part, a hidden Jason remembers that he also experienced something similar. But seeing that the protagonist seems to have no emotions, he understands that he will accept the god's reward without thinking. However, to his surprise, he ends up rejecting it. The nameless divine being tries to convince him to change his mind, but the protagonist makes it clear that he will not trust someone who hides their name, receiving the approval of Jason, who is still hidden. However, the nameless divine being seems confused, claiming that he didn't know his name was still hidden. Finally, he reveals himself as the great demon who haunts the abyss, immediately recognized by Chan as Mephistopheles. Chan's evident expression now makes the demon hesitate. He asks him if he knows who he is. The protagonist pretends he does, but acknowledges that he is one of the great demons, so powerful that he would even give the dragon Tiamat trouble. He's a solitary being and an expert at hiding in plain sight. Although Chan tries to hide his expression, he continues to betray that he knows more than he says, causing the demon to doubt him. In the end, Mephistopheles doesn't care and allows him to ask for a reward. However, his gaze goes from surprise to disbelief as he sees how the constellation, the Big Dipper, returned altered to reclaim him. Chan is only amused to see the warriors return as the dungeon begins to close, with the countdown activated. For her part, the girl with the captivating rune arrives, being chased by captive men. Running at full speed, she asks for the protagonist's contact, who doesn't plan to give it to her. But he gives her a note, with an address on the back, where they can help her remove her mark. Since he's not the best at that, he asks her to take care and that they meet again, if possible. Just at that moment, the dungeon closes, in a great flash of light. When the little girl opens her eyes, she is back in the city, surrounded by soldiers and frightened people. They are amazed that, even though they only had one player, they managed to complete the dungeon mission, celebrating. The little girl's parents run, crying to hug her. She's still in shock, realizes that she is alive, and starts looking for Chan everywhere, without success. Later, the protagonist is sitting, appreciating the moon and the stars, accompanied by the serpent that wraps the world. He congratulates him on having such a pleasant pastime. Meanwhile, Mephistopheles awaits his answer. The protagonist smiles, remembering his grandfather, stating that although it wasn't how he thought, he finally returned. Thus, dawn arrives, with the three divine beings fighting over him, waiting for his answer. He just walks calmly through the city, with a certain nostalgia, aware that his mission to attract them was a success. Arriving at the quest, choosing a guardian star, which basically consists of choosing a god who will grant him protection and powers. The Big Dipper claims to be the best option, offering him the position of first arrow. The serpent does the same, offering him the role of wise and enlightened one. The demon, for his part, with little interest, only offers him the position of final observer. But he seems to have no interest, seeing that precisely. The three interested parties are useful for his plans, not needing any of the others to advance, except for one who just shows interest in him, the Twilight Owl, the original owner of the seal that Mephisto forged, the goddess Minerva, the entity of justice, who has just become interested in him. With this, thinking it was, after he avoided the temptation of the seals, by letting the people live. However, he continues walking, with more gods joining in their interest, until a warning arrives. If he doesn't choose a guardian star, he will be left behind compared to other players, who will obtain one. However, he shrugs it off until the time runs out, achieving the feat of rejecting all the offers from the gods, receiving the hatred of the gods, and increasing his karma points. This clearly doesn't worry him. He is actually glad that everything is easier than the dungeon. Meanwhile, at the World Council of Players for Freedom, known as the Association, a UN-dependent organization, created to manage dungeons around the world with international powers as researchers with special predilection for the high ranks of the organization. And inside, in a dark office, a man observes multiple screens next to a woman. She shows him the news, where they clearly seem to be attacking the association and are upset about its actions in the dungeons and the governmental power it wields. This angers the woman, who was precisely in charge of managing everything, to address the emergency. Her name is Ye, a third-class agent of the association. For his part, the man is more concerned about the articles that mention a mysterious boy, showing that no matter how much they try, information keeps leaking out. Annoyed, she starts smoking, which earns her a scolding from her partner, that he almost responded with a punch. Leaving that aside, both agree to be confused about how a newbie finished a 2-star dungeon and disappeared without a trace, despite all their attempts, until out of nowhere, they report that they found him in the place that feels like home, literally at his house, which the protagonist just arrives at. He is greeted by a dog and his mother, who is preparing a stew that awakens Chan's hunger. Although still in stealth mode, the smell of the food overwhelms him. Despite not even liking it in the past, he feels the nostalgia of hundreds of years, reuniting also with his dog named Koso, whom he missed and who starts licking him excitedly. His mother tells him that the food is ready and sends him to bathe, making Chan feel happy. He is glad to be home now, seeing the appetizing food dishes, where he has to deal with a dinner with a gloomy family, led by his father, mother, and 2 brothers. Remembering why he avoided staying home, seeing how both brothers get up from the table, remembering how his father's family owns many properties, inheriting a hospital to his father, while his mother's family is made up of legal scholars and diplomats, and his siblings, who are already leaving, also have similar professions. His older brother studied medicine like his father, and his sister specialized in music, winning many competitions. Both seem to leave with no intention of returning soon, which makes him remember that compared to them, he was just a weirdo who played video games, and yet, being the youngest of the family, they must have worried after he disappeared for several days. He assumes that's why. They try to give that image as familiar as when they were closer, which he really doesn't care about, being more focused on how delicious the food is. Everything remains silent until his father interrupts him with a loud bang on the table. His mother tries to calm him down, but he is not happy at all, angry because his son doesn't say anything. He complains that when the gate opened, his mother fainted, and some claim that he could have been dragged inside. His brother searched for him in all the hospitals in Seoul, and his sister and mother looked for him everywhere, preventing them from traveling abroad. Furious to see that the only thing he does after disappearing is come back like a beggar, to eat, yelling at him to get out of there, and to stop causing problems for his family. His mother tries to defend the protagonist, thinking he is acting this way, out of regret, asking him to say something, but his father doesn't wait for an answer, grabbing his briefcase and slamming the door. His mother asks Chan not to take anything personally, while her face shows clear sadness. Chan notices it immediately, as well as his mother's noticeable wrinkles, and seeing how fast time has passed, he feels negligent, remembering that he always distanced himself, expecting his family to worry about him, without him doing anything to get closer to them. Thus, he tells his mother that he is sorry and asks for forgiveness, something that leaves her astonished. Later, he goes to his room, which is a pigsty. This worries him about the lifestyle he was leading. He picks up what he can until his puppy arrives, which he hugs, wondering how to undo this disaster. He decides to start by cleaning. Meanwhile, at full speed in a late model car, the organization's agents are on their way to see the protagonist. However, Yoon's partner is worried, doubting how they will pay for a car like that with their salaries. She states that it's because of their contract jobs, which apparently are illegal, although she only cares about impressing the newbie. Meanwhile, Chan finally finishes cleaning and lies down to rest, although he can't do it because the divine entities keep bothering him with system messages. Still, he is more interested in the sad expressions of his family, feeling that he wants to show them his change. He thinks that if they see that he is no longer an alcoholic, they might open their hearts to him. Everything seems to be going well while he plays with his puppy. However, he remembers that he soon plans to use Mephisto, and also recalls how, before returning, he asked Thanatos who he should be most wary of on Earth. The answer was the ruler who resides in his world. Given Chan's doubt, Thanatos confessed that he knows him well. The tiger who has been trapped in difficulties, a man who enraged both the past and present Chan. Remembering him as one of the enemies, who was present at the trial, laughing all the time. Despite everything, he knows it won't be easy to catch him, since he is strong, like a slippery tiger with a large entourage. At that moment, he sees the white tiger logo in his text message, announcing that the Tiger Clan will be recruiting new players, explaining that clans emerged after dungeons appeared, along with the gods who showed their faces, forming clans with loyal followers. He admits the lack of creativity they have in naming their clan, just like their servants, observing his phone, and although he knows he can't start a war against them, he must find a way to end them, one by one, without them noticing. He decides that everything must be ready in a month, so he leaves his house to take a taxi to a remote place, in the middle of a mountain, running in the middle of nowhere, since it has to be something that cannot be interrupted, not by humans or animals, something he must do alone. Running through the forest, he reaches a bathroom, although it wasn't his destination. Luckily, he found it, since he ate too much and thinks of healing himself with magic. Thinking twice, he decides to do it the old-fashioned way, being the first time he's entered a bathroom in millennia, coming out as good as new, ready to continue his journey. He arrives at a very remote place, where it seems he will begin, using his sword to make a cut on his hand. He uses his blood to form runes of stealth on the trees, making the area invisible through a dome. He takes off and stores all his clothes, and then clears his inventory, where there are hundreds of items made from the monsters he has eliminated. Among them are the Mamba's Fong, the burnt tiger claws, and the poisonous Milano beak, along with other objects, including the spider gland, which he takes out of his mouth. With everything ready, he remembers the first elder, who showed him that the best way to repel poison is by using the fire energy that accumulates in his body. With this energy, he can destroy poison and evil, acting as a purifying fire that will activate as soon as it detects foreign substances in the body. The elder concentrated on his fire, stating that the stronger the substance, the greater the potential of the fire. Unleashing the fire with the 8 trigrams earned skill, which the faster they burn, the more they purify the substances. Chan starts with the heart, which he painfully pierces with the Mamba's Fong. It quickly infiltrates, nullifying poison resistance, and starting to spread throughout his body. He receives a system warning that he must heal quickly. However, upon finishing absorbing this poison, he discovers a hidden piece that allows him to reproduce a poison similar to the Mamba's. His suffering increases more and more, as do his achievement points. He is left in critical condition. Just then, he decides to use the burnt tiger claw, which infiltrates his intestines and liver. The pain is at its limit, and the notification from the good season of the house hopes he survives, seeing him terrified. Meanwhile, the serpent admires him and is curious, and Mephisto is just waiting for the answer, which at least is better than Minerva, literally just cheering him on. With the pain rising and another poison infiltrating his arm, Chan's body melts into a virulent green. This makes him scream, leaving him on the verge of collapse. Without stopping for a second, he pours the liquid from the spider's poisonous gland, which seeps into his lungs, unlocking another hidden object. Now, having 5 main organs filled with poison, a putrid green permeates his entire body. Just when the poisons come into conflict with each other, almost unable to move, with the pain at its maximum and the system warning that he will receive permanent damage to bodily functions, he screams in despair as a small flame emerges from within him. In this way, his fire mana begins to concentrate, which was impregnated in his body, and is now released from his mouths and various parts of his body, discovering another hidden piece and unleashing a great flame expelled from his body. Finally, reaching his goal, the fire of the 8 trigrams earns a sacred and ancient forgotten fire, with which he begins to regenerate, purging the poisons and freeing himself from impurities, recovering his body functions and organs, obtaining the fire and poison attributes. He also obtains the Phoenix achievement, which resurrected from the ashes, with a plus 15 to all his stats, immunity to 10 poisons, and the blood poison skill. Fully recovered, he smiles for completing the mission, checking his status window and moving on to the next thing, getting weapons. For their part, the agents arrive at the protagonist's home, seeing that they are not the only ones there. In front of them are the head of human resources from the Sword of Wisdom clan, Young Un, and the blonde, muscular assault leader of the White Tiger clan, Seo Young-won, also known as Sabretooth. Seeing this, the agents think that they were beaten to the punch, but the protagonist is not there but in another place, enjoying stuffing himself with food, and remembering how Thanatos told him that, as a king of weapons, he would need a blacksmith who could satisfy his needs. Chan attentively wants to know who that would be, receiving an address. A man kindly takes him there, only to discover that it's a shop that has been closed for 5 years. Seeing the closed shop, he distinguishes that the chains still smell of divine fire. Assuming they are using a good brazier, even the good season of the house constellation detects it, which confirms his suspicions, breaking the chain and opening the door. With the constellation, very interested in the aroma of good metal, Chan observes all the weapons in the place, walking among them while good season of the house is excited, feeling like she's in paradise. However, her excitement turns to anger when she sees that the protagonist is focused on a rusty weapon instead of all the others. Chan takes the weapon, despite the constellation's demands, to throw it away, but he is more interested in every detail of it until someone appears behind him. A man with long hair, guided by a dog. Chan immediately notices that he is blind. Meanwhile, at Chan's house, his mother offers fruit snacks to her guests, surprising everyone with her elegance. However, now they must return to the competition. Young mocks that the agency is so interested in a rookie. Kaun is also surprised to see them there. Accepting that the criteria change with a super rookie, we are told that Young is the face of the White Tiger, with the highest battle power in Korea, but with a complex about not having a mustache. He wears a fake one because, according to him, strong warriors have them. Meanwhile, Wow, from the Wisdom clan, is part of a large corporation, and the uncle of one of the survivors of that gate. Everyone understands that they are there to make sure no one else recruits Sean. So Yoon asks June what he's doing there, but he has no intention of telling her. This sparks a quarrel about who got ahead of whom, accusing each other of government abuse of power and of obstructing and stealing state secrets. Chan's mother interrupts everyone, wondering if they have come to recruit her son. Everyone joyfully presents their proposals, but she knows that only Chan can decide. Still, she takes advantage of them being there to ask them what her son did during the 5 days he was trapped in the dungeon. Meanwhile, the protagonist is now talking to the subject about being a weapon, something that amuses the subject. He already considers it strange that someone would entrust him with something like that. In that state, good riddance, he says, affirming that what the subject says is right, because he doubts he made the weapons. This bothers the serpent, who shuts up to continue observing. The blind man gets up, annoyed, feeling that he is being mocked, so he asks Chan to leave, taking his dog, Wilson, with him. However, Chan detects his lie, stating that his forge is still active. He's given away by the calluses on his hands, and he suggests that his financial problems could starve his faithful companion. The blind man thinks it over, listening to the protagonist's proposition. 10 million for each request he fulfills, and 50 million at the end, regardless of the quality. But if it exceeds his expectations, he will give him a good bonus. He shows his hefty advance, which somehow the blind man sees. Ignoring this, it seems that the offer convinces him. He asks for more for the rent, and once he receives it, he is ready to work. The protagonist clarifies that from now on, he will only work for him, asking him to call him boss. Some time passes. The man is receiving Chan's order, who, as if they were French fries, orders a 5-meter-long whip, an assemblable spear, 5 huge axes, and a hand axe, 5 different types of swords and a shield. And when it seems that's all, he adds a bow and arrows, in addition to suggesting that he will commission armor from him. In the future, the blind man tries to refuse, but receives a generous amount of money to cover the materials. Chan also warns him not to break the deal, or he will have to reimburse him triple. He feels like he's dealing with an annoying idiot, something the protagonist is used to. However, the blacksmith doesn't understand why. Chan trusts him with something like this, since it's the first time they've met. Although he can see him, Chan agrees that it's true, acknowledging him as a mere disabled person, a nobody. But he clarifies that he is paying for a product, so he expects not to be questioned too much. The blind man accepts, telling him that even if he wanted to do it, he has little time to get the materials and remember how to work. However, the real problem is that he doesn't have the special hammer that he uses with his forge. It was stolen by his brother, the first disciple of his father, who is now in a very large clan. Chan understands this and offers his help, asking which clan his brother joined. The answer is that he is in Igaf. Apparently, the protagonist doesn't know where that place is, but he will go get the hammer anyway. The subject doubts that he can do it, as it is a very dangerous place. But Chan plans to go in and not leave anyone alive, astonishing the blacksmith. He has great admiration for Chan, whom he now sees as an interesting person. Finally, he gives him the address, trusting him. And now he is on Manhwa Mountain in Seoul, arriving at a kind of base where many people are moving about. This is the Igaf clan, who recruited the blind man's brother. The reason is that he will help them clear a secret dungeon, having to go through a lock where there are hidden pieces, with the entrance guarded by armed men, which the protagonist is starting to become interested in the dungeon as well. But first, he must check in with his mother, and then do some research online about the clan he will be facing, which is a front for organized crime, basically committing all kinds of crimes. He concludes that they are trash, so it wouldn't be bad to eliminate them completely. This earns him congratulations from Minerva and the ability Unyielding Spirit, a blessing type, which gives him mental immunity and an iron will. He receives it with humility, although he knows his intentions were not entirely just. On the other hand, Good Riddance and the Serpent that coils the world are also excited about the upcoming battle. He begins by hiding his identity using Look Below Yo, oh my god, which improves his camouflage. It's not the Love and Hooge Mask ability, which improves his camouflage and visibility. Besides, it suits him very well, with a huge sadistic smile that matches his intentions, preparing his rags made of ice comet feathers. This triggers a slow freeze that ends up leaving everyone trapped in blocks of ice. He passes between them only to, with a slight movement of his sword, shatter them, making them explode. However, it doesn't seem cruel enough to him for the trash he's dealing with. Seeking to make them suffer more, he uses his blood to touch one of the frozen criminals, impregnating the ice with his blood poison, which infiltrates it to affect the criminal, further intensifying the pain of freezing. Walking with a smile, he leaves them behind as the ice melts, being contaminated by corrosion. He hears the screams of pain caused by the blood poison. The protagonist, boasting, climbs the stairs, suggesting to the scum that they not try to heal themselves, and that they just go to the other world in great pain, which they are clearly feeling. This amazes the constellations, and so he opens the door to officially enter the dungeon, the Tomb of the Beast, which is in complete darkness. But the Laughing Hero's mask activates its visibility effect, allowing him to see in the darkness. The protagonist thanks Bayu for the loan and starts his search for the blacksmith, thinking that he is surely near the gate to create the keys, thinking that if he has the opportunity, he will take the reward. And the dungeon mission activates, requiring him to complete it by killing the guardian beast and stealing the treasures. The dungeon is divided into 3 sections, where he must find the objects installed to protect the tomb. Good Hunting Season asks him why he hasn't accepted the mission yet, but the protagonist seriously asks him to get out of there. This confuses Good Riddance, since there was supposed to be nothing there, but the protagonist insists furiously. And from the corner, the face of the sadistic rabbit appears, asking him to calm down. He introduces himself as Harold, an admin who makes Good Riddance uncomfortable because she didn't notice his presence. The rabbit increases her humiliation, stating that everyone else had already noticed him, leaving the divine being incredulous. She turns to look at her fellow constellations, who look at her with pity, embarrassment, or trying to console her, making her look like a foolish goddess. The rabbit revels in the moment, and Good Riddance tries to save herself by congratulating him on his high-level concealment, even though the rabbit doesn't know about that technique. Their egotistical argument is interrupted by Chan, who asks him directly if he followed him to write the report. Confused, he freezes when he sees that a rookie knows about the report. Regarding the god's interest in him, he reports that he must add that to the report. Pulling out a laptop from nowhere, trying to play it cool, he looks at Chan suspiciously, remembering that he is the current star rookie, and that the gods are waiting for the administration's report. And since he's already been discovered and his report is halfway done, he thinks he'll have to pass it on to another admin, He cries because he's sure he'll be scolded for being discovered. Luckily, the protagonist offers him what he's looking for, the skill right, exciting him. However, this is clearly in exchange for something. He accepts on the condition that it's not too much, but Chan seems to be saving the favor for later, worrying the rabbit a little. However, for the protagonist, his request will be easy, and upon hearing that he can only fulfill things within his jurisdiction, he smiles accepting this and sealing the contract, which is legally accepted as a mana promise, with the condition that if it is broken, they will lose their magical abilities. The rabbit is nervous, sweating as he sees that he knows about the mana promise. Seeing him as a veteran player, he runs after him as Chan confidently moves forward, receiving congratulations for his cunning. Meanwhile, at the forge, it seems that there was another failed key, which enrages the High Chief of Conquest of the Yengu clan and Guff J. Aware that if they continue to fail, he will be punished, he has his minions bring someone else, who clearly doesn't want to be there, screaming for help. He is presented before the boss, who berates Jean Day One for his new failure, the disciple of Gaia Ja, who stole Jesse's hammer. He now begs for another chance, asking for more blood to complement his forging. He receives a brutal kick in response, along with the boss's complaint, since he got him a personal sacrifice and a flame, and yet he keeps failing. He demands a good reason not to eliminate him. Day One, instead of giving him one, complains that the flame was low quality, then apologizes again, begging for one last chance, asking for more blood to complete the key. He claims that he almost reached the third layer of the mechanism, managing to convince his boss again, who gives him one last chance, stating that if he fails, he will destroy him. However, his attention turns to the system, which indicates that the dungeon has a new ranking. The protagonist appears as a new player. By his rabbit pair, he excitedly writes the report on the protagonist, highlighting the rapid interest of the gods and his great combat skills, seeing how he advances at full speed, clearing 2 areas in a matter of seconds, cutting a gigantic steel ball with one slash, and effortlessly dodging the traps, which he seems to have memorized. He is stunned by his skills, but by investigating so close, he ends up being crushed by the debris, and so, ending up injured. He finishes his report, seeing that the competition among the gods, to have Chan as their apostle, will be fierce, with the 12 constellations and the 28 mansions surely showing interest in him. He reminds him of someone from the past, precisely the protagonist in another time, something that disturbs the gods. That someone was the twilight of the gods, a being who mocked gods and stars, and shone brightly, and then faded away. We see a memory of that time, where the twilight looked piercingly at the monarch of the void, with a big smile of satisfaction, provoking the completely furious protagonist to feel that he was being mocked. Returning to the present, the protagonist easily dodges a saw to keep moving forward. Both the good hunting season and the twilight owl warn him about a strange smell that seems to be a bad omen, feeling how from every corner the essence of blood is perceived, walking through a horrible death scene that enrages the twilight owl, who orders justice to be done. The protagonist reaches the end of a hallway and sees that to make the keys, they made many sacrifices. Just then a couple of henchmen arrive, escorting a group of tied-up people. They sob and beg to be released, as the criminals rush them, to avoid being the ones beheaded. But a frost of ice wipes them out, and the others suffer the same fate. As the protagonist enjoys the massacre, one tries to attack him, but only ends up being hit and pierced by Chan's sword, who only wounds him in the shoulder. This is enough for the criminal to be filled with intense fear before the protagonist's gaze, recognizing him as something non-human and beginning to beg for forgiveness. With this, Chan offers him a deal, all the information in exchange for his life. The subject accepts, stating that there are 30 men preparing a ritual, and that he should only beware of their boss, KS1. The criminal asks him not to expose him, or he will be punished. Chan remembers that he never promised to spare him, and tears him apart with his dagger. Then, what's left of the criminal is subjected to soul extortion, which amazes the prisoners, who see a demonic aura pass by them with the protagonist. They believe they are witnessing a spectral apparition. And speaking of specters, another henchman walks, mocking the fact that he has to look for a famous gamer, who he thought was already dead. But just as they mention him as an apparition, he quickly passes behind them, terrifying them. Unable to react, they are eliminated by a large explosion that the boss hears. Annoyed that his men haven't returned yet, he becomes nervous as he sees Chan slowly climbing the dungeon rankings again and again. Finally, terrified, he sees Chan reach number 2. He assumes that all his helpers have been eliminated. Just at that moment, one of them arrives asking for help, walking like a zombie, delirious. The boss recognizes him as the deputy director's son and demands that he control himself. But it's too late for the boy, who claims to have seen a ghost. He arrives agonizing, full of pain and runes, bursting into a giant flash of light that sends the boss flying, leaving him with a severe burn and poison. This causes his resistance to drop rapidly, bringing him close to a painful end. Barely surviving, he grabs a flask and tries to drink it. However, with his body almost putrefied, a second explosion marks the protagonist's entrance. Resolutely, he goes towards him, being blocked by JC, who is still able to swing his sword, screaming in pain, but with no intention of giving up. To the protagonist's surprise, he knows that because of the poison, he shouldn't be able to see, let alone react. Only by instinct, he manages to predict his movements. However, the poison continues to take effect, making him fall to his knees. Chan recognizes him as someone very strong for his level, but he doesn't overlook the fact that in such a safe country, such horrible things as human sacrifices still happen. Jason keeps looking for a way to heal himself. The protagonist thinks his strength is due to an enhancer, or that something else is going on there. He admits that he only came for Oh High Sea's hammer, although now he is more interested in the secrets of the place. Remembering that reinforcements will surely arrive soon, he hopes that by then, the sacrifices will have already escaped. They arrive at the room where they are hiding. This turns out to be the room the protagonist suggested they look for. Yang thinks they will be safe, and starts his plan by distributing his skill points. Meanwhile, Jason continues searching for the antidote, which he finally finds, only to realize it's empty. The protagonist warns him of this, returning to the attack, ready to eliminate him. But his rival survives again and again, in a fierce battle that excites even the constellations. The clash of swords continues. The protagonist's dagger skill also increases. He announces that he is ready to end it all, launching a powerful attack that shatters the boss's sword. Almost dead, he can't believe it. Unable to defend himself, he is victim to the protagonist's incredible attack, who tears him to pieces in seconds. And so, agonizing, he wonders why he ended up like this. Chan is surprised that someone capable of killing innocents is surprised to end up the same way. Not satisfied with that punishment, he uses soul extortion, ending what's left of his life and soul, sending him to the flames of purgatory, keeping his energy. The Twilight Owl is impressed by the righteousness, or rather, by the false righteousness of the protagonist, who receives a new blessing called inner peace, which allows him to maintain composure in chaotic situations. This makes him nervous, because these blessings seem to present him as a kind of apostle. He remembers his past as a ruthless and cruel being, whom they called an evil god. Meanwhile, the good hunting season looks for something to give to the protagonist, so as not to fall behind Minerva. The protagonist reaches the final boss's room, which is well sealed. He needs to find the key. Just then he equips his fire go bone and throws it directly at the blacksmith, who screams in pain before falling lifeless. Along with the hammer Chan picks up turns out to be a mountain goat hammer, which seems to have been formed in a meteorite. This surprises him, but he doesn't care at the moment, so he decides to enter the door, thinking that the invincible could surely be a key easily. And considering that it's too much work to use that plan, he moves on to the next one, calling the rabbit, who, surprised, doesn't understand what he wants, until, with a terrifying look, he indicates that according to their deal, he must fulfill his request and open that door. He tries to get out of it, but after a few small threats, he ends up agreeing. This causes the constellations to mock the little rabbit, who is worried about being punished, or worse, getting a pay cut. So he opens the door using his authority. Inside, he seems to see something that fills him with excitement and joy, changing his attitude and enthusiastically asking the protagonist to enter. He does so, looking at him with some distrust, with the door closing behind him, and the rabbit laughing sadistically. The protagonist arrives in front of a gigantic three-eyed being, which begins trying to invade his mind, attempting to take control of his body, and demanding obedience. The mission is to resist the curse and steal the chest to win. With the hypnosis hitting the protagonist hard, he stands firm, while the being commandingly orders him to surrender his flesh. However, the protagonist remains standing, motionless. Outside, the rabbit can't help but laugh, bursting into laughter, while mocking how easy the final boss should be, believing that it all comes down to keeping the mind out of the control of the Tomb Master, crying with laughter, seeing how simple it would be if it weren't for the fact that the Tomb Master this time is formed by the thoughts of the enormous beast, mocking that a newbie could never overcome this. Remembering how annoyed he is with Chan for wanting to play with him, he retreats, giving him up for dead. However, the Twilight Owl's two abilities activate, clearing the protagonist's mind and completing the mission in a matter of seconds. This leaves the rabbit stunned, not understanding what happened, until he sees Chan holding a golden key in his hand. As the dungeon finally closes, the rabbit admits he failed, watching the countdown end. Later, during the night, the protagonist returns to Jesse to give him the hammer, which leaves him a little confused. But the protagonist is only interested in knowing when production will begin. However, Jesse states that he won't be able to have his entire order in a month, to which the protagonist prefers to give him a week, which further upsets the subject, who claims that he won't make it. The protagonist leaves, eating a cookie, stating that he will pay him triple for the trouble, astonishing his blacksmith. Chan interprets the blind man's surprise as a yes, and leaves to return in a month. But before that, he picks up the rusty sword. When asked if it's for sale, Jesse completely refuses, since it has been passed down from generation to generation. But faced with an abysmal amount of money, the protagonist ends up buying it, even paying for the sentimental value. Jesse accepts the payment while petting his dog, who leads him to his forge where he begins to prepare, still not understanding why he chose him, but he plans to give it his all. Chan remembers how in the underworld, Thanatos suggested he look for Jesse, whom he thought was lost. After having created the Capricorn divine artifact, the confused protagonist thinks he's looking for a god, but the king of the underworld clarifies that he's looking for a pseudonym, a mortal who passed his mantle down through generations. Therefore, although Capricorn eliminated the original Jesse, he left a successor, and despite the fact that many of the family's skills and powers have weakened, he still knows that the weapons created by the successor will be incredible. And now the protagonist thinks the same, knowing that the flower of Hades will bloom his weapons thanks to the blind man, whose real name is Bullion. Later, Chan travels by taxi, observing his prize, Peter's key. Surprised to have found it in Beast's tomb, he continues on his way home so as not to worry his mother. Meanwhile, a furious mobster is scolding his men for not having found the one who closed Igo's dungeon. This is the head of the clan's raid department, Gu Sung-won, who sends his men to look for the protagonist, dead or alive. He's worried that the real owners of that door, the White Tiger clan, will find out. Understanding the media problems, he must use human sacrifices, which is a problem for their collaboration. So he decides to go to the mountain immediately to fix the problem. And now, he's worried to see that not only did they close the dungeon, but they also took the key. He's sure that if the White Tiger finds out, it will be the end of his life, especially if it reaches the ears of June, who would wipe out his entire family. Meanwhile, at Chan's house, the recruiters are still waiting, until Jung seems to receive a message from his assistant that immediately upsets him, releasing a huge aura that materializes into a lion's roar. This amazes everyone who tries to calm him down, managing to bring him back to his senses and dissipate his aura, while criticizes him for using that ability with civilians nearby. Jung proudly turns to look at Yoon, who is protecting Chan's mother. She is furious, which makes Jung make the best decision, leaving proudly and without apologizing. People ask the woman if she's alright, and she confirms that she is. However, now, she understands that the awakened seem to live in a different world. She sees them as very rough on the outside, but sensitive on the inside, just like her son, who she feels she won't be able to keep from getting hurt. Worried, she asks everyone to leave, and the three of them go down in the elevator. Gu is annoyed because June made things more complicated, and he asks Yoon and Jean what they'll do now that they failed to see the protagonist. He remembers that the girl who survived the dungeon is his niece, who will probably throw a fit, so he'll have to keep pestering Chan. With that said, he offers to send them some coffees, and they decide to stay. Jean accepts and starts to give his order, But Yoon shuts him up with a slap, saying that they can't stay because they still have work to do. Jin argues otherwise and receives another slap. With that, Gu says goodbye to them. As they walk away, Jin notices that his partner has an extremely worried expression. However, her attention is diverted to her phone, where she receives a message with a red code, which warns about the incident on the mountain where they rescued the survivors, who were almost sacrificed, requesting backup. This terrifies Jin, and Yoon tells him to hurry up or she'll leave him behind. Meanwhile, the protagonist is practicing with the rusty sword, enduring criticism from the housekeeper for taking that antique. Although at first glance it looks like firewood, the protagonist knows very well that he has in his hands the divine artifact, Yu Chan's sword. He thinks it would be an excellent combination with his evil dragon sword, since that sword is one of the first weapons forged by Jesse, part of the blacksmith's 9 blades. With just one of them, he could unleash a war, just like what happened in Arcadia, causing ruin to many empires. He's surprised that one of those legendary swords ended up there, originally belonging to a murderer, who made the sword absorb a lot of blood, and therefore a lot of resentment and pain. It's considered a cursed sword. This made it difficult for many to know its appearance, and since the original creator was considered a divine craftsman who hated blood, they assumed that because of its appearance, it's so neglected and almost all the symbols are erased. Annoyed by the housekeeper's insistence, he decides to move on to the next thing. He thinks that if he could gather all the swords, it would be good. But now, with the spear made of bone, he decides to attack towards seemingly nothing, but crashes into a tree, causing a great flash of energy that reveals a hidden person. This turns out to be Gu, who claims he was just practicing a little stealth, although he calls his attack somewhat barbaric. Chan, however, continues staring at him, eventually scaring him. Gu tries to block a strong blow with his daggers, grimacing despite being confident. Gu is surprised by the novice Chan's physical strength. For his part, determined, he keeps moving forward, attacking. His rival calls him a crude and unpredictable swordsman. Wow! Understands that his movements have only one clear objective: to eliminate the opponent. Enduring the strong blows as best he can, he realizes that he's clearly not facing a novice. With the clash of swords at its peak, Gu only thinks that initially he wanted to get closer, to test Chan's skill. But now he sees that his honor is at stake, and if he makes a single mistake, he will lose, and consequently, he'll be scolded by his niece. So he decides not to hold back, unleashing all his power and focusing it all on his sword. Both prepare their thrust, but just then, a sword plunges into the ground. Gu, surrendering, admits that he almost lost control in the fight, returning to his usual friendly demeanor, which confuses the protagonist. He admits that he just wanted to test his skill, and apologizes for going overboard in the fight. Meanwhile, the housekeeper adds more fuel to the fire, encouraging them to keep fighting. The protagonist instead just asks him who he is. Gu, feeling respected by the tone, quickly pulls something out of his coat, his business card, and with a big smile, admits that he wanted to recruit him for his clan. The protagonist, very serious, remembers that the deity of Gu's clan is the nameless giant god, who does have a name, Upon, a god of wealth who is supposed to look after possessions. And although he's not at all happy about the strange offer, he decides to ask Gu how he found out who he is. The answer is that he's famous now, which worries Chan, who realizes that the clans were faster than he thought. Determined, he chooses not to reject him immediately until he knows more. Gu, embarrassed by the attack, says that he would like to talk more with him when his anger has subsided, and leaves, suggesting they get in touch. Meanwhile, the housekeeper is still upset that he let him go, triggering a response from the divine serpent being, who basically tells her to go bother someone else. This provokes a series of threats between gods. Chan, with a fixed gaze, watches Gu leave, thinking he knows him from somewhere. Then he runs off, worried that more recruiters might have stopped by his house. He's worried about his mother. Meanwhile, Gu seems restless, with blood coming out of his hand. The protagonist arrives home, trying to explain, but she greets him with a bright smile, and ready to make him something to eat. Relieved, the protagonist decides to tell her what happened. Now we see a bright sunrise in another world, where the twilight of the gods is being lectured by an old man about how he has a murderous look at such a young age. He doesn't want to listen to lectures, to which the old man, smiling, says that he won't take no for an answer. At least not until after a good beating. Chan, surprised, wakes up to an alarm on his phone. That tells him that he has a recruitment interview scheduled with the White Tiger. Worried by his sudden dream, he wonders why he dreamt that, especially since now he will have to act for Real. And right at that place, there seems to be a big celebration, full of players who are training or preparing. And there's a bald guy with a robot, calling the players to use a magical power measuring device. When the protagonist touches the robot, it ends up melting in flames. This amazes everyone, seeing that his power is immeasurable, awakening the attention of some players. Later, they bring him a higher level device to measure his power again. This attracts the attention of a small female player. She seems to recognize his name and face, getting excited and calling him Tyrant, something that Yang really assumed would happen. This also awakens the interest of a strange individual, with bandages, as well as a lot of rumors and comments. Some talk about how his gamer team disbanded. Others criticize him for his appearance, although the protagonist scornfully calls them squid faces, and others doubt what the tyrant is doing there, while the female friend keeps looking at him with enamored eyes. And the three of them go pale when they see his level 25 and his triple S magic rank. Another who is also astonished is the bandaged individual, who observes as those in charge of the interview lose control and must look for someone of higher rank to handle this case. Meanwhile, June is in his office reading the newspaper, specifically about the Igaf case that Chai Yun is following. She talks about the human sacrifices and that this will bring legal consequences for the Igaf clan, and seeing how the White Tiger also started a personal feud against the Igafs. They have managed to prevent him from being connected to it, at least. There is also the report about the gratitude towards the man with the mask who saved the people. Hyun identifies him as the one who wears the stone mask, who is precisely his next target. At that moment, the bald man interrupts him to inform him about the super rookie, which for him is not of interest. However, the senior managers have decided to come and see him, surprising the blonde man. They inform him that the rookie is none other than Yang, whom he couldn't recruit due to the chaos in the dungeon. He gets excited because he is there, with excellent results in all the tests. He rushes to be the first to get him. Meanwhile, in the arena, the protagonist reads an article about his surprising resurrection after retiring from video games, returning now to the White Tiger's camp. With great results, and with his announcement, the envy of all the other aspirants is unleashed. They see the protagonist as someone who has always had everything in life, including now a huge awakening, and also the good season at home. She feels proud for having noticed him first. The protagonist, for his part, turns his gaze to two hooded entities, where one emanates a brilliant divine aura of a lion. These are the eyes of the tiger. This brings a huge smile to the protagonist's face, with the test beginning, which consists of monster hunting, where the bald man gives him a complete catalog of monsters to summon as his opponents. Chan minimizes the options and asks for the strongest one, which is the Drake, which accepts immediately, amazing everyone. And with the summoning circle activating, the protagonist walks towards it as a huge giant dragon materializes, roaring furiously, looking directly at Chan. He doesn't even flinch as the tiger observes him, and everyone is attentive to the challenge. The tiger believes that his apparent lack of movement makes him a perfect candidate to die, something that only pleases the protagonist's ears. He remembers how he glared at the divine being, who mocked him during his trial, looking at him with a murderous expression, at how he dared to laugh in his face. And now, in the present, he smiles, ready to exceed expectations, while the creature roars loudly. The Drake attacks at full speed. The protagonist responds by throwing an air container, remembering how, right before the event, Jesse arrived today, completely exhausted from carrying the protagonist's order, who doesn't notice his bad mood, which annoys Jesse, because he had been working without sleep for days. But Chan is only interested in the quality. Jesse, tired, yells at him that he'll know when he tries it, and the first test will be right in action, taking out his assemblable spear that amazes the constellations, joining both parts that form the spear from two nameless sticks with the quality of damage accumulation and amplification of blessings, directly linked to him being non-transferable, starting to warm up a bit, exciting his housemate, both because of the protagonist's movements, as the quality of the weapon, And now we return to the present, with the dragon against Chan, who, without wasting time, launches a direct attack at the dragon's eyes, who screams in pain, leaving the audience in shock, as well as the ruler of the void, with his gaze fixed on Park Seon-jo, the leader of the #1 conquest team of the Tiger Clan, who is amazed, seeing the reflexes and precision of the protagonist, whom he will seek to join forces with at any cost. With Chan running at full speed, Jesse materializes his second weapon, the 9-tailed cat whip, which catches the attention of the audience, and using the whip to retract his spear. Like a dojo, he attacks the dragon's eyes again, further injuring the monster, jumping on it again, preparing his attack on the head, releasing a bright flash, piercing the creature, and with another simple movement, he tears off its head, starting a massacre before everyone's eyes. They are incredulous to see that a rookie has such speed and good weapons. Some even fear him. The protagonist hears this, enjoying it to move on to the final phase, activating his blood poison skill, which begins to spread through the dragon's open wounds, paralyzing it little by little. Desperate, the dragon tries to attack, while the protagonist calmly observes that if the poison doesn't kill it, the blood loss will. And finally, he finishes the dragon off with a strong blow that sends scales flying with a gigantic golden flash. And so, the announcement of the end of the fight and his level up brings a smile to his face. His housemate admires his growth, while the eyes of the ruler of the void praises the amazing fight he witnessed, offering to be his Fong. Seon-jo can't contain himself any longer to have him on his side, and asks his assistant to call him immediately. Until next to him, a golden flash passes at full speed, which the protagonist knows well what it means. Still on the battlefield, he also notices it, preparing to withstand an attack from Goon himself, and glad that the protagonist managed to block his attack and tolerate his aura power. He admits that he is better than he thought. Meanwhile, Chan only feels the stench of the ruler of the void reaching his nose. Goon continues attacking him, promising to make him a true tiger. The protagonist thinks about finishing him off right there, but he stops, considering that it's not a good way to approach the god. Luckily, a spear appears from the sky, separating them, accompanied by a voice that asks them to calm down, enraging the blonde man with a fake mustache, who threatens Chan for interfering. Although this one sees the leader of Group 2 as a spoiled brat, starting a verbal confrontation about who will get the protagonist in front of the audience, amazed that they are fighting over a rookie. Sunwoo and Hyun join the battle, leaders of teams 3 and 5. Now the protagonist is just a spectator, who expects a bloodbath to begin between the leaders. Everyone releases their power. Chan notices that everyone has received the tiger's blessing, becoming his enemies to eliminate. The tension increases until a loud voice and a huge aura of light makes itself present, calming everyone down. The mere presence overpowers the masters. It is the executive director of the Ozone Guild, who walks imposingly and is recognized by Chan as the second in command of the White Tiger Clan, with an aura so strong that it even makes his nose bleed from his presence, amazing his housemate. Because of all the power the old man demonstrates, who is there to lecture the leaders for fighting, in a place where they must show team unity. The protagonist, very attentive, sees him as a target too powerful to face. For his part, Jun believes that the director will be on his side and is ready to gloat until he sends all the leaders away from there, since he cannot take sides with any of them, deciding that he will keep the protagonist. This one, without wasting time, takes him to his office, where the ruler of the void watches, amused, as the protagonist changes his bloody clothes, making his housemate jealous. Trying to mark territory, the director, also acknowledges Chan's good physique, specialized for combat, without a single superfluous muscle. Thinking about the boy's hard life to reach that level, looking at him fixedly and seeing his god's interest, he asks him how much money he wants, being rejected immediately, because Chan can literally swim in money. So he tells him his real objective, the future strategy department, precisely the department he leads, which could use someone powerful. This unleashes an ironic laugh from the director, which unleashes his powerful aura, which finally begins to make the protagonist dizzy. Stops laughing, admiring his intention to aim so high from the start, and seeing it as a quality of a tiger, explaining that the future strategy division is precisely the main head of the clan, so he asks how he will prove that he deserves to get there. The protagonist, without hesitation, says that he will achieve a record in the Crimson Mountain Range, the initial mission for newbies. This astonishes the director, who believes it is a risky objective, which Sean sees as no problem, affirming that he will do it. This is enough to pass the test. But noticing that the director doesn't seem entirely convinced, he raises the stakes, completely clear the dungeon. The director, now excited, accepts. This makes Sean suspect that there is something interesting in the mountain range. Therefore, the protagonist asks for one last favor, to use the White Tiger Library. The director, seeing his hunger for knowledge, accepts, and so he quickly arrives at the library, where he checks that he is once again a worldwide trend, awakening people's interest. And seeing how the haters are left without arguments to attack him, they resort to government conspiracies and strange theories. He also sees how it is confirmed that it was the protagonist who cleared the Jasmine dungeon, thanks to the testimony of an anonymous girl, who is clearly the little girl who helped him, and a not-so-anonymous, but equally pixelated Jason. Meanwhile, Jung throws a terrible tantrum for the director to hand over the boy to him, arguing that he will guide him on the right path. However, he knows that this path is not good at all, suggesting that he calm down or he will demote him. Finally, the old man consoles him, stating that Sean would not accept any position other than the one he wants, threatening to resign if he doesn't pass the tests. But once he finishes the test, he will be his subordinate, and he will send him on missions with Jung's group. This seems to please the big crybaby, who still wants to see Sean. Luckily for the director, he is in the place that the fake mustache hates, the library. And so time passes, reaching the day of the camp, with all the interest of the networks focused on Tyranno, who arrives at the imposing Crimson Mountain Range. And from the mountain range, a huge pink flash emerges, enveloping the place, raising a gigantic wave of wind that reaches the protagonist, who sees a gigantic bird pass by, which is precisely his next objective. He receives the mission of the Crimson Mountain Range, which is being deformed due to an entity full of negative energies. His task will be to eliminate the creature, going through the 8 zones of the mountain range and defeating their final bosses. And so he visualizes the mountain, recognizing it as a place as horrible as the one seen in Arcadia. However, his attention shifts to his pursuer, visualizing the silhouette of a man who seems to be watching him for a long time, specifically since he arrived at the library. Going back further, when Thanatos mentioned how massive and disturbing the White Tiger Library was, explaining how the ruler of the void was a specialist in disturbances, causing the White Tiger and his disciples to accumulate many enemies, which they use as examples when defeating them, boasting about the defeated's exploits to their god. He also affirmed that in the tiger's library, he could find something useful, offering a list of items he could search for. But the protagonist refused, thinking of doing it on his own, until Thanatos mentioned one of those items, the Sagittarius martial technique, Divine technique, that make a body as fast as light. Chan, trembling upon hearing about these techniques, doubted that the ruler of the void possessed that, since he had never fought against Sagittarius. But Thanatos assured him that he had information from a fallen star, which convinced the present Chan to search for that treasure, which, according to legend, made Sagittarius ascend to a constellation, having previously been a small star, and with this ability, stolen from another distant star, that allows one to appropriate space, to project their presence. It turned him into an absolute space, managing to ascend to a power that, if the protagonist obtains it, will make him unstoppable when he recovers his divinity. However, he has a single problem: the watchful gaze of the tiger behind him. He watches him carefully. During the week he has to use the library, which, according to the librarian and the guard, will be open 24 hours. He arrives, explaining the rules of the place, but more importantly is the autograph he asks for his girlfriend, a request that Sean epically ignores, and he begins his total concentration mode, using imperturbable mind and mental peace to start his reading. The reading continues for several days, under the watchful eye of the librarian, who must keep him under surveillance. He thinks that Sean is simply putting on a studious facade, reading several books without focusing on anything in particular, which complicates his mission of informing the director. And crying from exhaustion from watching him, he begs him to go home and give him his autograph. But Chan is in a state of concentration that allows him to read between the lines and memorize faster, and further improve his knowledge until he enters a state of madness, overloading himself with information with rest alerts. He manages to unlock the achievement of light reader, increasing his willpower and intelligence. The study time ends up boring, the kind housekeeper, but arousing the curiosity of the serpent and exciting the tiger. During these days, Chan acquires a lot of knowledge, while amusing himself by seeing that the tiger doesn't know that. He is literally learning his techniques to defeat him, searching for their weaknesses, both his and his subordinates. After so much reading, he seems to have unlocked a new, incomplete skill. With a serious look, he waits for it to be revealed. However, he ends his study upon seeing that the skill he is looking for is nowhere to be found, accepting that he will have to search in the second and first grade libraries. About to give up, he receives support from Minerva and decides to take one last look around, touching a book that seems interesting. Reading it quickly, he discovers that it is a cookbook with a great secret, a story that comes from a being who holds a deep grudge. Reading this man's outburst, he talks about how his brother, Muncian, betrayed him. The protagonist goes into shock upon remembering Muncian as the hero of the Celestial Sword, one of the 9th generation swordsmen, founder of the White Tiger, along with the director and the apostle of the ruler of the Void. Doubting that someone like Muncian could have a brother, since he is one of the few mercenaries who managed to become famous among the players, and created his own martial arts, which caught the attention of the tiger, who made him an apostle. But that doesn't seem to be the real story. Continuing with his reading, the captured man calls himself Anju, Muncian's brother, or at least he was, and crying, he bleeds as he remembers how, being a successor of a not well-known clan, he trained for years to perfect his swordsmanship until everything changed when his master brought in a new disciple. Being too young and with his master's end near, Anju took care of raising and training him like his brother, being happy to see him progress. However, he always understood that his brother shared the thoughts that the protecting god of their clan, the tiger submerged in hardships, sought in both brothers. They had the tiger face to face, seeing him as a god who favored war, chaos, and fear. This contrasted greatly with their clan, which had to fight for peace. Therefore, in the confrontation, Anju decided to unsheathe his sword, unleashing a great power that manifested as a colossal pink flash, destroying the tiger's aura, astonishing his brother and enraging the hooded being. Unable to choose an apostle, Anju felt proud of having stopped the intentions of the ruler of the Void, unaware that he was being watched with envy by his brother. Returning to the present, Chan understands that was the reason why the god, lover of war and chaos, did not appear for 100 years. In returning to the story, Hanju tried to stop the ruler's bloodshed until he chose Muncian as his apostle, who today is known as the hero of the Celestial Sword. The protagonist becomes more interested in the story, while the librarian watches him reading a book upside down, confirming that he is only trying to appear studious. Returning to the story with the fateful destiny of Hanju. Unable to use his sword, he was betrayed by his brother, who secretly injected him with poison for a long time in undetectable amounts. He was trapped between gigantic bars, while his brother looked at him one last time, leaving him alive, with his muscles severed and without magical organs, locked up in a cave in the grounds of his clan. There, he saw how he was no longer protected by the tiger constellation, which now followed his brother, granting him the title of hero of the sword. Anju, full of suffering and without understanding the betrayal, couldn't do anything for years until he heard the voice of a being. And so the story ends. Chan thinks that the other story is somewhere else. Checking his status window, it indicates that he has found a hidden piece in a nameless testament, increasing the combination of fragments of his skill. With this, he understands that there are hidden pieces to discover. Within the hidden pieces themselves, he realizes that a mere mortal could not leave something like this, so there must have been divine intervention. With only 2 hours until the camp, he desperately decides to search for the rest of the story, being sure that just as he found it, other clerics must have also found the encrypted messages, although they must not have found the final answer yet. Ensure that everything is in the library, he begins his new search for books. This makes the librarian cry, and so Chan gets closer and closer, The divine serpent being watches with great curiosity until they finally find what they were looking for, returning with Hanju, who says that the being who found him admitted that they were the same. Both had been betrayed. The swordsman by his brother and him by his children, who turned him into a mere ghost, wandering the lands of the dead, and both hated the same enemy. The protagonist is astonished to understand that this is the son of the ruler of the void, assuming he has found a hidden story. That could be his weakness. The story goes that the ruler of the void, whom he and his master served, was nothing more than a yokai, far from being a powerful demon. He had to devour his entire family to transcend. Hanju, needing to see the demon's head fall, to rest in peace, receives from the being a way to defeat him. This makes the swordsman rise, heal, and return to the world, training to become stronger, practicing the teachings of this new being. Then, when the brother who betrayed him returned, Hanju prepared himself with his sword, deciding to fulfill his desire, eliminate him, and then wield his sword to overthrow the ruler of the void. However, as he walked his path, he doubted if he could do it, not for lack of power, but for the affection he still held for the one he raised as his brother and disciple. Thinking about that, he left his testament in the form of a secret code, hoping that one day his secrets would pass to a new successor, informing that he discovered all the fragments of the hidden piece. The protagonist, Sirius, feels the will of someone he doesn't know, welling up from within him. This increases his stats and unlocks the skill, Black Mountain Claw, which can force an opponent into massive critical bleeding. Observing how Hanju used it as an instant kill, conditioned to be used without confrontation, releasing a great shockwave aura, a cumulative impact. The story continues just as Hanju reached his target, his brother, and with the ability to hide or combine skills. The swordsman, filled with hatred, decided to go after him. Now we return to the protagonist, who notices that his new skill is perfect for counterattacking, but comes from the same root as the tiger. Reading the final part of the story, where the two brothers face each other in strong clashes of power. Being this the point, Chan understands the resentment that must be in that skill, admitting its great power, but also its excessive energy consumption. Recognizing that with his current power, he can only perform one attack, he must gather all the necessary elixir to move on to his next mission, the training zone. Returning to the present, the Crimson Mountain Range, Chan recognizes that the difficulty may be high, since he must clear it completely to fulfill his promise to the director. However, his main intention is to investigate the secrets of the place, and annoyed at having the librarian tailing him, he assumes he must get rid of him first, although the latter asks him to pay him the same attention as in the library, that is none. Believing he must endure him a little longer, and annoyed, he finally enters the safe zone, being observed by all the newbies, who recognize him and fear being compared to him. However, Chan turns his gaze to three useful people, the trio of friends who were at the camp. This moves his fan to tears, from whom he looks away, considering her annoying. Then he observes the bandaged subject, on whom he focuses to discover his name, Baek Jiho, who seems to have already received the blessing of another god, and the person in charge asks for attention to formally inaugurate the event. Chan notices how once again he seems to be trending, being observed by all those interested. Now we cut to Woo in his office, receiving a call from his niece, whom he seems to be trying to convince to get him a signed card from a major brand. However, she doesn't want this, yells at him, and hangs up. This depresses Woo, who remembers how he was always a loving uncle, watching his adorable niece and Ben grow up until the incident occurred at the Jamsil Gate. At that moment, he was filled with fear along with her parents, knowing that the little girl had been trapped. He sought to form a rescue group and prayed to his God that his niece would return safe and sound. Just when he was informed that she had returned, this made him cry with happiness. And when talking to her, they asked her about the man who rescued her, calling him Uncle Chan, and she asked her real uncle to keep his identity a secret until he himself decided to reveal it. Woo agreed, stating that as soon as he could, he would look for him to make him part of his clan, thrilling the little girl. However, his recruitment attempt seemed more like a personal attack. He remembers how he lost control at that moment, but he was never able to speak directly with Chan to make him a real offer. He thought that Chan would call him, but he ended up waiting for him for a month only to then see him appear as a great talent in the White Tiger clan, realizing his mistake. And now he must endure his niece, calling him several times a day to tell him that she hates him for not getting Chan, something that has also been complained about by his brother-in-law and the president of his clan. And now, seeing that the protagonist has become almost a magnet, he thinks about how to bring him back. Meanwhile, at the camp, the fan continues drooling while photographing the protagonist, making her brother jealous. He admits that he didn't think she would manage to qualify, observing that she has the same level as their other friend, Hyun, who complains about being in the same group as the protagonist. And at that moment, he has a scowling face, being pulled out of his hateful trance by the boy, who forces him to pretend that he is fine and serene. While the bald man announces the final details of the training, which will last 100 days. During the first month, they will be given the opportunity to learn 3 skills of the White Tiger. They will receive combat training, and then, during the following 70 days, the safe zone will be eliminated, and they will have to survive with what they have learned. Points will be earned, depending on the monsters they eliminate, being monitored by instructors and security agents, who will only intervene if they are in danger, disqualifying them on the spot, but giving them a small reward if they obtain a good score. However, they will be left out of the clan, which will only be entered by the top 5 individuals who will receive the blessing of the constellation, clarifying that as long as they do not commit a crime, they will have complete freedom. He takes out the scrolls with the 3 basic skills. Tiger Aura, which releases magic to attack. Tiger Step, which is used for speed. And Tiger's Peril, which amplifies attacks. Once all 3 have been read, he asks them to tear them up to learn them. With this, the bald man announces that they will be given a practical demonstration, but Chan raises his hand to state that he has already learned all the skills, asking to go to the safe zone immediately. Everyone is surprised, thinking that he used some dirty trick, cheated, or doubting that it's true. Meanwhile, his fan ends up drooling over someone else, annoying Hyun, who seems to be jealous and angry, hoping that the protagonist fails, knowing that to prove it, the protagonist did not receive the definitive skills, so he doubts that he can perform them. Excited at the thought that if he fails, the little fan, named Gina, will stop drooling over him. Although his sadistic look makes her brother uncomfortable, the protagonist just takes a deep breath and releases his power, activating the skills and generating a great aura, even taking the form of a tiger, surprising Hyun, seeing the imposing protagonist taking an attack stance. And so, the lion's aura envelopes him, surprising everyone. And with a swift movement, he launches a direct attack towards the instructor, who, terrified, can't even react. Meanwhile, the attack is not directed at him, but to the side, where he leaves a huge claw mark on the ground, and great destruction in the forest, incinerating creatures that were just passing by. The shocked instructor wonders how he did it, while Chan replies that he just tried it, and it worked, an answer that confused and terrified everyone who sees him as a cocky idiot. Just at that moment, the librarian appears, who, facing Chan, firmly understands why he was locked up in the library for so many days, and recognizes the interest that Director O has in him, believing that he is not just a genius, but a scholar who for days sought to understand new areas and develop his talent. The librarian apologizes for thinking it was just a facade and sees him as someone inspiring, making a small bow before Chan's confused gaze. Everyone reacts, seeing that despite being a prodigy, he had to work hard to achieve results, thinking that perhaps if they also try hard, someday they could reach him. This leaves Gina overly excited, who exaggerates a bit. Meanwhile, the ruler of the void is also excited, seeing how he mastered his techniques, stating that Chan will have a very high position if he continues like this, something that doesn't seem to please the housekeeper very much, with Chan receiving confirmation that he passed the first test and walking towards the forest, leaving the safe zone behind before everyone's eyes, including a group that watches him with murderous eyes. Later, Chan hears the ruler of the void, stating that he is excited about his declaration to clear the dungeon. The protagonist understands that he has been observing his conversation with the director. However, he notices how the air in the place begins to become denser, thinking that it is due to the alteration in the ecosystem that they mentioned, caused by powerful magic. He considers it unlikely that a casual player can withstand these conditions. Taking a deep breath, he activates the 8 trigrams to purify himself. He also activates Unbreakable Heart to make a decision and releases his double spear, making his first move using tiger steps, amplifying his power, unleashing an attack from the spear as if it were lightning, eliminating another monster. Happy to be right, he finds the hiding place of his first target, the one-legged ghosts, which jump terrified, trying to escape, being just what he expected, activating his tiger transformation, but this time with a pink hue, starting to move, determined to try something, activating the skill Claws of the Dark Mountain God. Smiling, he uses his move that tears all the monsters to pieces, incinerating the entire area in the process. The ruler of the void is surprised by his strength. The protagonist observes his destruction, noticing that the ruler didn't realize the magic he actually used, and also he confirms that it's a technique that consumes a lot of magic. Tired, he thinks he must improve his magic resistance, and so continuing on his way until a ghost attacks him by surprise, only to be destroyed with a simple movement. Then he activates his Viper Eyes, starting to easily destroy all the monsters around him, moving the good housekeeper to tears. The serpent that envelopes the world is intrigued, asking him for permission to read his skills as data for research, and the protagonist, full of power, receives the notification that he has eliminated the entire tribe of one-legged ghosts, obtaining their items as a reward, and then deciding to use soul extortion. Just when he notices something, a strange flower with eyes. The flower, seeing itself observed, quickly tries to hide, but Chan captures it, ripping it out from stem to root, making it cry and try to free itself. According to Chan, this flower lives in regions of life and death, possessing a powerful lethal poison, and now he plans to use it. While he remembers how he searched for more information to increase the flame of the 8 trigrams, trying to evolve the skill of attack regeneration, which he consulted with the second elder, who, upon hearing his request, burst into laughter, seeing him as crazy for wanting to take further the heavenly Tao flame, which represents birth and creation. The elder considers that Chan seeks to turn it into an object of destruction. Although he admits that if he doesn't do this, he will help him. Chan asks for the method, and the elder explains that he must seek to increase the firepower by adding more flames, warning him that if he adds too many, he could be devoured by them. Therefore, he suggests looking for a specific flame, a cruel and vicious one possessed by the stubborn specter, or the crimson canine, with which he could ignite hell itself. In returning to the present, the protagonist follows that creature that soars through the mountain skies, sadistically recognizing it as the stubborn specter. Moving on to the next part of his plan, ignite the flame of the 8 trigrams, feeding it and keeping it constantly lit, and use the weeping flower, which he devours in one bite, chewing it while his skills try to purify, igniting the fire within him and increasing his magic, while continuing on his way, eliminating more one-legged ghosts, obtaining their skeletons and hearts, in addition to collecting more weeping flowers and finishing off red beard ghosts, eliminating more creatures. Meanwhile, the good housekeeper is bored of watching him walk, while the Twilight Owl observes him with interest. Meanwhile, Chan is calm, continuing to eat poisonous plants, arriving at a large peak, where he climbs to find the specter's empty nest, where he remembers how the elder explained that this winged being is not a beast, nor a specter, but rather a non-living being, composed of a colony of specters that represent fire and death. The protagonist is interested in the idea of eliminating it by destroying its core. However, the elder clarified that it doesn't have a core, but something similar. Its right eye, formed by a compound of several dozen spirits, full of resentment, that form a jewel in its eye. Exactly what he's looking for now to increase his flames. Seeing that the specter is momentarily not in its nest, he decides to wait for it, starting to set traps. Meanwhile, at the camp, the instructors are amazed to have already passed 26 people in a matter of 10 days. Thinking that they were very much influenced by the protagonist. On the other hand, in the forest, the group that has something against Chan observes the destruction he has caused in his path and prepares to search for him and eliminate him, believing that it will be easy to finish him off, assuming that he receives some advantage from the white tiger to learn skills in a matter of seconds. However, one of them, fears that the supervisors will find out about their plan, considering that the white tiger professes justice and the leader of the mercenaries, on the other hand, knows well that the white tiger has its roots in beings like them, simple murderers within that world organization. They are merchants who do everything for money. The mercenary with the goatee believes the protagonist is promising, either because of what he has earned as a player, or his gaming career, or his wealthy family, believing there are many options to exploit him. On the other hand, he fears they will do something that will harm them, which provokes hateful looks from the others. The latter thinks that if they fail, they will have problems with their real objective, participating in the camp and stealing the dream ore, remembering that it's the only way they have to deal with the white tiger as members of the Igoff clan. This further ignites the anger of the other two, who, feeling underestimated, for thinking they can't handle a simple novice, threaten him until he gives in, activating his power and following the path. This one, with no other options, follows him as well. Meanwhile, the protagonist, from the top of the mountain, patiently awaits the arrival of the specter. Meanwhile, hundreds of explosions begin to appear, eliminating several creatures due to the traps he set. Again and again, this makes him level up, thrilling the good housekeeper, who sees the explosions as fireworks. However, seeing all the traps activate with no sign of the specter, Chan assumes it will not return to its nest, deciding to leave and look for new tracks. But first he must deal with something. Just as he is about to leave, he dodges a powerful attack that causes a huge explosion coming from the bandaged man, who is amazed by Chan's power, annoyed at having been followed, and even more so because now he has seen too much, decides to eliminate him, going head-on against Bike, who barely manages to block, initiating strong clashes between the two. The protagonist admires him for his spear control, thinking that he could be at level 35. Getting serious, he starts attacking fiercely, making the bandaged boy recoil from Chan's precision, and aiming directly at his neck. Seeing the danger, Bike uses the Dark Palm skill to deflect the protagonist's move. Without thinking twice, he unsheathes his sword and attacks directly at Bike's head, who only closes his eyes, ending in a huge explosion. But he was still alive, opening his eyes and seeing the rusty sword at his neck. Not understanding why the protagonist stopped, the protagonist seriously asks him how he knows how to use the secret shadow technique. Now, confusing Bike, who doesn't know how the protagonist has that information. This leads Chan to remember his days marked by fighting in war, when he still had comrades he trusted. Over time, those comrades drifted away, due to the protagonist's increasing sadistic madness, thus losing his precious bonds and memories. Specifically, he remembers the god of slaughter and destruction, the 1,000-year-old sleeping dragon, the blood iron lion, and the wandering shadow, Church. It was precisely the latter, whose unique technique he just saw, the so-called shadow techniques, the sole authority of that divine being. With this, Chan calms down, but now Bike is even more confused, because the protagonist knows a name that his master only gives to his comrades. That's why he attacks again, forcing the protagonist to retreat while defending himself. This entertains the ruler of the void, and annoys the good housekeeper, who doesn't want to see her protege lose. Against the bandaged man, Beck continues to be enraged in the fight. However, Chan knows he must avoid eliminating him, since he knows the shadow techniques. The clash between the two continues. Chan releases his spear to deflect the attacks, and launches himself into the attack again, surprising Beck, who barely manages to block him. And Chan's astonishing strength ends up making Beck retreat. The protagonist combines his skills, increasing his aura as he enters tiger form, forming an imposing aura called Tiger Domination, which roars fiercely, marking Chan's attack. Beck tries to block, but fails, sending him flying, crashing against a wall, and barely surviving, unable to move. He sees Chan arrive, threatening him with his sword, with the notification that the good housekeeper is thrilled by the fight. Chan stands imposingly in front of his rival, whom he recognizes as a ghost-born. Beings born from a ghost in an unnatural way, with horrible appearances and great supernatural abilities, who live their entire lives cursed. Beck, worried, asks him how he knows. Chan replies that it's not important, but in his mind, he knew it since he saw his marks. Burn marks, which are actually birthmarks, due to his spectral ancestry. Understanding that the shadow technique is not a learned skill, but an innate ability, He understands that he is the son of his friend, Church, by possessing his energy. This worries him, thinking that his old friend is so weak as to let his offspring be trapped in the human world, and seeing that it's useless to keep fighting, he assumes the boy doesn't know his parents, agreeing to reveal information to him, admitting that he knows he's there for the Spectre, to heal his scars. Although he looks at him doubtfully, the protagonist clarifies that he is not descended from a fire ghost, so the flame eyes of the stubborn Spectre will not be useful to him, and he states that he noticed his nature while they were fighting, seeing that he can use the shadow techniques. He further explains that the Spectre he seeks is more related to the death element, and possesses such a powerful chi that he doesn't think he can devour it unless he wants to become a full-fledged ghost or a hellish demon. And if that's the case, he will allow it. But really, seeing Bike's face, he understands that he was only guessing, looking for any way to end his curse. The boy sees that he can't do anything anymore, but Chan gives him hope, promising to cure him, astonishing him. However, this will be through a deal. He must collaborate with all the information he has on the stubborn Spectre and help him hunt it down, since he must have investigated even more than him. To get there, Beck still hesitates to trust him, and as a show of goodwill, the protagonist shows him that he can cure him by asking for his hand. Trembling, he extends it, and he is asked to endure the heat that he is about to receive. He begins to use the power of the 8 trigrams, immersing the boy's hand in fire. He screams in pain. Chan warns him not to give up and stop screaming, or he could damage his lungs. He endures the pain while, following the system, he affirms that the ghost-born state is disappearing, along with the curse, amazing the boy. The protagonist observes that it's working on its own, needing to reach the center of the ghost-born, right in its heart, which it's reaching. However, the flames begin to recede, and now he's out of breath, trying to speak, and Chan asks him to check his face, which is free of the curse. With the process finished, the cursed boy now sports a new face, carved by angels, which the hunting season admires. The serpent thinks about investigating this ability, while the tiger is happy to see the subordinate's handsome face. However, Chan clarifies to the boy that with his current abilities, he barely managed it, making it unlikely to fully heal him. So he asks him to join him in going after the Spectre and increase his firepower, promising to cure him through a mana pack if necessary. For Bike, what he did is enough to trust him, placing himself at his command. Chan, very excited, wants to see how skilled his new companion can be, so he gives him his first order, to formally address him as if he were an adult, since he's uncomfortable that his old friend's son speaks to him so casually. The boy agrees, very confused. So, Bike leads him, tracking the Spectre's habits, which are similar to those of a hoarder. Being a collector, they decide to inspect the gold-filled nest more closely. Weapons and other items that excite the hunting season. The protagonist notes that they are prizes claimed from its victims. However, Bike knows that they are not just shiny objects, but clearly, it distinguishes between regular and valuable objects, collecting the latter as war spoils. He states that if they investigate the place, they will find the direction it's headed. Along the way, the protagonist finds a white hummingbird bow, admiring its abilities of deep penetration and quintuple attack. And seeing all the items, he thinks about taking several to use and selling the rest, until he notices an orb that gives off a deathly odor. This is a phantom orb, created with the flower of death and despair, along with another unknown object, harboring hundreds of stored grudges that will affect its victim, causing them bottomless fear. So, he decides to keep it, assuming it's an object that sends one into a pit of certain despair, related to the white tiger. Just then, Beck informs him that he found the trail, seeing how the creature is focused on a mission that has consumed all its energy, having to focus on eating. Assuming it's in the center of the mountain, the protagonist is surprised that his new helper is functional and has made a great discovery. This makes them both run up the mountain so that, for days later, they seem to arrive at a gigantic desert landscape, like a cemetery, remembering how the second elder told him that the Spectre's flames are gigantically greedy and passing by many corpses that it has devoured. They reach the Spectre classified as a grade 4 calamity, which is causing great destruction and drought. Chan immediately uses Viper's eyes, visualizing his target, with which he plans to debut his new bow. The tiger, excited to see his powerful subordinates, gives him a special advantage boost, This makes the protagonist feel a boost, getting excited, magnifying his senses, preparing his shot with all his might. Meanwhile, the jealous hunting season searches his archives if he has anything good to offer. Annoyed because he finds nothing, and being desperate, he gets excited to find the perfect option. The authority skill. The protagonist sees it as something very typical of the desperate constellation. And now, with the perfect precision authority, which allows no prey to escape his sight, he continues aiming amidst huge flashes of lightning, launching several arrows that manage to hit the beast. This turns into an electrical storm that causes a lot of damage to the Spectre. Beck is also completely astonished, and Yang sees how useful the skill given to him by the ruler of the void is. Although the hunting season thinks his skill is more useful, mocking the other constellation, and the protagonist activates the beast senses he just acquired, rapidly improving all his senses, giving him more agility and danger prediction. And so, the protagonist runs straight towards it. Bike, somewhat confused at first, follows him, animated that they will surely win. But just then, unauthorized intruders appear on the scene. Two instructors state that this is a safe area, that trainees cannot enter. And with the lightning storm attacking the Spectre, the protagonist's lightning skills continue to level up, causing critical hits with each move, and making the creature scream in pain before the astonished gaze of Chan and the others. Seeing this, the bald instructors warn them to leave the safe area. Beck is the first to jump furiously, demanding they be allowed to finish the hunt. This only puts the baldy on the defensive, who threatens him directly, and with the Spectre regaining power and trying to escape, Beck insists on following it, as he doubts they'll have another opportunity. But they insist that they retreat, leaving him frozen in fear. Angered, Chan remembers that O promised him complete freedom, turning to look at the librarian's hiding place. The latter, nervous, better escapes, thinking that the white tiger is trying to hide something related to the orb they found, assuming that someone knew that this one was eliminated by the Spectre, seeking the Spectre to hide information. So, he decides to provoke him a little more. Smiling justly, he asks if by not entering the protected area, they can continue as normal. And as soon as the answer is affirmative, he smiles as he sees the monster attack them. Just what he takes advantage of to begin his plan. With his inner flame burning, he begins to slowly absorb the gigantic source of fire. The Spectre returns a little earlier, when Chan observes what remains of a monster, and concludes that the Spectre had a chick, seeing that this is the reason, which is why it accumulates a lot of energy to share with it. He asks Beck if he has any plan to find it, and although he says he has a couple of ideas, he doubts they will work. Chan seems to have an idea, to look for the creature's feeding place and set a trap. Returning to the present, he uses soul extortion to lure the creature towards them, absorbing the spirits that are linked to it, and then burning it with the trigram fire, with the flames engulfing the battlefield. Beck is amazed by the protagonist's power, remembering how a little earlier they prepared that monster with ice poison and paralysis, with which they poisoned the Spectre. Chan, seeing that his plan is going exactly as he thought, remembers how he didn't mention that his decoy monster would still have a spirit, which upon being absorbed by the monster, would attract it with his trigram fire. This should expand to all the other spirits linked to the monster, using soul extraction to attract them. Determined, he knows it's time to begin, absorbing all its power, quickly and excessively consuming the power, receiving alerts from the system, indicating that his strength and magic are at their limit. He must break those limits to absorb more power, ending up engulfed in flames, joyful to earn the title of He Who Swallowed the Sun, which increases his authority level. And with the Spectre trying to resist, it lunges towards him and the others who see it coming. Without knowing what to do, Yang prepares his next move, to use the flames offensively, starting to burn the rusty sword he was carrying, bathing it in fire and blood, to complete the requirements of the divine artifact. Remembering that there's only one way to completely hunt the monster, and that's by activating the divine sword. It needs a good amount of end-of-the-world flames, which they are now absorbing with great ease. And the other ingredient is his blood, which it must absorb to unleash the power. Remembering how the black sword was passed down from generation to generation by Osung, taking its place as the brazier's flame. And the fire is important, along with the blood, spilled by the countless assassins who wielded the sword. And with the specter flying, Chan sees the center of the sword filled with blood and fire, shouting loudly with the sword, beginning to change shape, engraving his name as its new owner. And now, a huge flash of light emerges from his sword, completely new, and from it, hundreds of voices and tortured souls expel their pleas to be released. And with an attentive gaze, the protagonist sees the souls passing from one side to the other, while Beck and the terrified instructors watch as a whirlwind of spirits engulfs the protagonist. With a single word, he silences the spirits, pushing them away with a large shockwave. The sword remains alone, and he wields it, becoming one with it, and unleashing its power in a whirlwind, which impacts the specter, causing massive damage and tearing it to pieces. And with more ranged attacks, the protagonist finishes destroying what's left of the monster, leaving everything ready to use the monarch's claw, completely evaporating the creature. And then he uses soul extortion and obtains the specter's crystal eye. This takes its diamond form, full of power and brimming with it. With this, he also gets an achievement for the liberation of the sword, and his dagger skill level increases so much that it can become a supreme and unified skill. The good hunting season throws a tantrum because he insulted that sword in the past. The serpent, truly no longer surprised by his knowledge, observes that the demon awaits an answer, and Minerva gives a blessing. This is one of Jesse's 9 famous swords that grants mysterious powers, such as bloodsucking and firestorm effects. And although it still has blocked abilities, due to missing requirements, this activates the hidden mission, the secret of O Jesse. It explains that these 9 legendary swords are objects filled with great power that he must now seek. To gain access to a mysterious world, he must beware of the beings who also seek the swords. The reward will be unlocking the abilities of the blacksmith's legacy. Oh, Jesse. With this finished, Chan brandishes his new sword, unleashing its power. The runes adhere to his body to use the power from his own hands, which have been hardened by the sword's strength. This suddenly increases his magical power capacity, as if a river were flowing through his body, while the instructors watch him in surprise, whispering that they shouldn't have let the specter be stolen from them. In addition to this, Chan surely has the orb, and since they have no choice but to eliminate him, one of them decides to do it right now, despite his companion considering it dangerous, after seeing that they will face someone who literally absorbed all the power of the specter. But the other bald guy thinks that this is the right moment, seeing that after all this, he must be tired. His companion agrees, and they prepare to attack. But the confident mercenaries appear, seeing that all the big shots are there. Chan, the specter's treasure, and the white tiger's dogs. The instructors ask how the mercenaries got there. They admit to having slipped through the gaps in their defenses. This worries the bald guys, who nervously recognize the leader, Devil's Mace, Named Yang Shinsai, the goatee known as Closed Knife Edge, Park Kipio, and the chubby guy Barwa. They assume that they decided to invade this dungeon due to the rumors about the white tiger. Yang states that he wants a good chat with them, releasing his chain mace and starting to spin it. The bald guys, seeing that they will have to fight, make the safest decision. Send one for reinforcements while the other confronts them. However, when one tries to escape, he is quickly intercepted, barely managing to fight back, managing to shake him off, only to see his sadistic smile. He states that this is just the beginning. The leader, on the other hand, takes care of stopping the other bald guy with his mace, shattering his sword. Now defenseless, he tries to dodge the blow, but doesn't notice that the movement changes direction, right towards his head, ending him in a bloody explosion. Chan laughs wildly, seeing how weak the bald guy turned out to be. This annoys the goatee, since they could have used him to extract information. But Chan calms him down, thinking they still have one left. But this further enrages the goatee, who doesn't notice the bald guy going for him. Meanwhile, Barwa confronts the protagonist and his companion. The latter asks him what he will do with them. The chubby guy admits that he doesn't want to, but he will have to eliminate them. Chan states that that is not in his plans, seeing how his rival activates his power. Confidently, he just points to the sky, suggesting they dodge, just when, to the astonishment of everyone there, they see a second specter beside him, speeding towards them. The protagonist remains calm, since he knew well that if the male was killed, the female would have to react. She flies at full speed, bombarding the place with a firestorm. The mercenaries dodge and try to react, It is the goatee who tells Yang to use the meteor hammer and his scroll. As the beast falls upon them, the protagonist calmly watches the spectacle, along with his companion, stating that he knew the female would have to take care of the young, while the male hunted, unless she knew he was in danger. That's why he wanted to help him. Bei is surprised by his intelligence, although he worries, because Chan goes on the attack again, looking for more jewels. He tries to stop him, but he won't listen to reason, implying that he has already recovered. He takes out the eye and devours it, remembering how the second elder suggested that he eat the eye, even before his complaints about using it as an object. Having already brought his flames to their maximum, the elder tells him that if he doesn't do it, he won't be able to continue altering the source. Furthermore, by doing so, he will obtain the power to become the Spectre. Returning to the present, this power surges within him, levitating him with the destructive element and the elemental spirit added to the trigram fire, fusing the elements, forming the annihilation element, thus continuing his transformation, turning the trigrams into ionic fire, officially transforming into the Spectre. A huge aura rises around him. He is learning to use the Spectre's abilities more and more, entering a more inhuman form, until literally becoming a great bird of light that soars through the air, leaving his companion behind while large explosions appear on the battlefield. The protagonist, in his Spectre transformation, quickly approaches with a huge smile, watching the battle with the Spectre bird, taking the mercenaries by surprise. They watch as the Black Mountain Claw attack activates, tearing them to pieces. Upon reaching the ground, the protagonist walks firmly towards the agonizing mercenaries. Yang is the only one who can speak, asking him to finish him off. But the protagonist has other plans, using soul extortion to destroy what's left of them. And now he must deal with the Spectre, which he completely absorbs, also taking its crystal eye, increasing both his power as a Spectre and his magical potential. He notices that he is reaching his power ceiling, momentarily obtaining the title, He Who Hunted Two Legendary Birds, managing to consume both eyes. With this, he becomes a walking calamity, capable of using the fire of the end of the world. With this achievement, he enters the dungeon ranking, placing 10th for the moment. He observes that the top spots are occupied by himself, Munsung, and the director. He thinks that the two monsters considered the masters of the mountain range being eliminated at the same time must have caused a stir. And now he sees what's left of Bar, who begs for his help. Chan, noticing that his wounds are terribly painful, tells him that he will help him leave this world if he gives him information. Later, Beck arrives at the scene, seeing how the protagonist exudes so much power that he looks like a sun. Meanwhile, Bei recounts that the Tiger Clan hired the mercenaries to open something. This reminds him that the clan grew rapidly. In a very short time, Chan reflects on why, remembering the 7 cryptic scriptures of San, composed of 7 scrolls, that the White Tigers sought 20 years ago, finding only 3. He assumes this was enough to grant them a lot of power, even though their founder, Munsung, is one of the best swordsmen in the world. The power of those followers is not so great in comparison. Even so, they have had great recent growth. He assumes the mercenaries were looking for the reason behind this. Chan demands more information about the mission from Bar, urging him to tell everything, but he must eliminate him afterward. He explains that the scriptures of San contain different teachings of the techniques of an ancient and forgotten constellation. Chan recognizes these as the Forgotten Stars. These date back to the beginning of the cosmos. Back then, there were few constellations that, although very weak like the newborn cosmos, were full of sacred power. These found their place in the world, and there are still vestiges of their existence. And with this, he reflects on how these can still provide strength, and how the ruler of the void kept them for himself. Bar continues, saying that only 2 scriptures have been revealed, the third being destined to be opened, with Peter's key, which Sean found in Yasmer. Looking at the chubby guy, of whom practically nothing but the torso remains, Chan asks him one last question. Why are they here? Bar replies that it's for the Pearl of Illusion, telling him that the first scripture was used to create an insurmountable warrior, a person who lost his soul to the starlight. Without a soul or ego, but full of light, these become sacred warriors, at the service of the stars, created through the fusion of wildflowers, the flower that cries and the one that laughs, to form the Pearl of Illusion. Shang understands that they created that dungeon just to cultivate the flowers and also to corrupt those they considered useful, reporting them as dead or missing in accidents. During the initiation, observing that those experiments were supervised by the director, or seeing that the mercenaries were seeking to uncover the White Tiger's corruption. With this information, he decides to finally eliminate Bard and seek answers on his own. Just arriving with the bald man, he feels backed by his tiger god, but ends up being rejected, seen as a useless believer. The protagonist gloats, seeing that his god prefers someone strong, and not someone who is about to die, awakening the sadistic sense of humor of the ruler of the void. And now the protagonist does the following: undress his companion, who doesn't understand anything, and Chang prepares everything to heal him completely, without distractions, since it will be difficult, clarifying that, although it will only be a couple of real hours for Bike, it will seem like 10 days or months will pass, warning him that it will be complicated, but soon. He ends up telling him to resist and avoid giving up, since otherwise demonization could begin. Beck understands that if that happens, he will become a monster or a ghost. Shang warns that if he notices that happening, he will get rid of him easily, since leaving the son of churches alive in his broken version would cause chaos in the world. However, Beck accepts that fate with a smile, which surprises the protagonist, who sees that he resembles his father. Although he seems somewhat stoic, he always had a desire, so Chan begins to use his power, setting the half-ghost ablaze. He screams in pain as Chan tells him not to give up. In the midst of a huge purple flash, Beck is transported to a cold and desolate place, a desert landscape, where he sees his old body and his cursed child version, which feels lonely and falls to the ground, until a man helps him, picking him up and taking him away. Beck recognizes that these are his memories. Memories he doesn't want to relive, seeing how back then he ran through the dark streets. After the one who took him in discovered he was a monster, seeing his past eating garbage, sleeping among cardboard boxes, and being beaten by those who discriminated against him, believing that if he had ended his life at that moment, he wouldn't have those traumatic memories. Then, a shadowy entity rescues him and asks him to come along. Beck ends up accepting, wanting to stop being alone, and is about to take his hand, but Chang's scream shakes his mind, asking him not to lose himself, rejecting the dark being and fleeing from him resolutely. He knows he shouldn't be there. Meanwhile, the protagonist remains standing, helping Beck with words of encouragement, and he is recognized by the Owl of Twilight for his display of nobility. It observes that the critical moment has passed, admiring the half-ghost for his persistence, grateful that he didn't enter demonization, since he doubted he could defeat him in that state, deciding to move on to the next thing. While Beck recovers, he covers him with runes to hide and protect him, while he investigates the research center of the place, activating his savage instincts, making the decision to first take care of all the useless witnesses, starting with the librarian. He tries to escape at full speed, believing he must inform the director, thinking he can buy time, while the protagonist deals with Beck. However, Chan is already on top of him, terrorizing him and throwing him to the ground. Upon getting up, he sees the protagonist's sadistic smile, terrified. He tries to use his sword, but as soon as he starts to move his body, a huge sword pierces his shoulder, leaving him impaled on a tree and looking him in the eyes. Chan greets him in a very familiar way. The librarian, terrified, asks him what he will do to him. Luckily or unluckily for him, Chan changes his mind and looks for a method so that he doesn't suspect him, and he decides to use the illusion pearl, introducing it into his mind and body. This paralyzes the librarian, plunging him into a hypnotic trance. The protagonist orders him to get up, and he obeys immediately, becoming a soulless being with whom Chan plays with him as if he were a puppy. He even orders him to kill himself, which he almost does until Chan stops him, amazed by the great skill achieved from a low-rank scripture, thinking that surely the other scriptures are much more powerful. With this, he orders the librarian to inform O that there are no anomalies related to him, and to act normally so as not to arouse suspicion. The librarian, emotionless, nods. Chan asks him to leave, which he does using his technique, and before he leaves, Chan calls him back to ask if he can learn that technique. The librarian tells him that his technique is called Flying Tiger Gale, which comes from the tiger steps, and that he can learn it. So Chan asks him to teach it to him, even though it's a little difficult for him, without a book. The protagonist affirms that he will learn quickly with the slave, repeating the movement over and over until the protagonist masters it too quickly, to the surprise of his slave, who admires him greatly. However, the protagonist prefers to send him away, thus spending a long time practicing the skill, learning stealth and hiding, and now he moves at full speed, surprising the tiger and the hunting season, who are looking for something else to give him. Tang lands in the middle of the forest, arriving just in time to find the spectral bird's egg, which they lay every 100 years. And these creatures, in theory, are just spiritual beasts without a physical body, so they could take any form. However, since their first form is that of birds, most retain their appearance. And thinking that he can endow it with intelligence, seeing that it is still forming, it can be very useful to him to turn it into a spiritual beast, thus beginning to release his power, trying to make the egg hatch by launching his flames, while the tiger of difficulties suggests that he form a tiger. To the complaints of the good hunting season, who prefers to suggest that he form a house dog or a hawk. The protagonist considers the latter option to be really useful. This generates a conflict between the two constellations, who end up wanting to fight. Laughing at the situation, he decides to continue with his plan, giving his power to the egg to form a powerful spiritual beast. And then he leaves it for the moment to go to the research center, where a scientist is very worried, waiting for orders from the director. The scientist complains about having been relegated to that place, despite all his achievements with divine light, the illusion pearl, and other great advances. The only mistake he made was keeping something for himself, which has him furious, becoming more annoyed as he continues to receive orders to wait. So, filled with anger, he orders his subordinates that, with the arrival of his research group, they get rid of all suspicious documents. Thinking about the Gildle project, which the director or supervisor ordered something that will surely pique the researcher's curiosity, and understanding that the association puts him in danger, he begins to consider becoming a ranker of the White Tiger, seeking to use the 5-star sword. Feeling that he is now more relieved, he thinks that if he plays his cards right, he can live a comfortable life, considering that Beck and Chong will be useful, but he doesn't know where they are, so he will have to settle for a subject who is trapped, literally in a test tube. However, he begins to worry, because his mercenaries haven't returned with the pearl, fearing that this will put them in danger. Meanwhile, the protagonist searches for the research center through the forest, while the hunting season and the tiger continue to fight. Childishly, uncomfortable with the whiny constellations, he arrives at a field of flowers, where he finds what he was looking for, the research center. And so, using stealth and applying his new wind skill, he launches himself into the research center, passing between the guards undetected. Or rather almost, since one of them seems to feel a breeze, which he attributes to nervousness due to the arrival of the group from the research center inspection. And so Chan continues on his way, using his tiger instinct, his viper eyes, and his flying tiger technique, to pass through several traps like lightning, undetected, moving at full speed among the workers, whom he notices are very agitated, and using his beast senses, he begins to listen to the surroundings, seeing how everyone is restless for fear of being discovered, punished, or something worse, managing to pick up conversations that mention that the subjects sent by the pearl haven't returned. The concern in the place increases upon hearing that a specter was defeated, something they thought was impossible. They also comment that they found the bald men lifeless, that they sent to the training ground. Meanwhile, Chong continues on his way, finding what he was looking for, heading at full speed to the facilities where the illusion pearl is produced, advancing quickly without being detected, noticing all the poisons impregnated in the environment, which he neutralizes with his skill. Finally, arriving at a closed door that requires identification. This complicates things, since he can't break it down by force without causing a commotion, and he starts to think about how to solve the password problem, finding the solution in Peter's key, which opens any door. However, he stops at the last moment, remembering that the ruler of the void is keeping an eye on him, and decides to experiment, placing his hand on the reader after placing the key, managing to open the door, surprising him since he didn't expect it to work. The tiger, meanwhile, is worried about his clan's terrible security system and suspects something strange about the protagonist's power. Luckily, the World Serpent explains that Chan is a kind of descendant of the Red Serpent, a random thing that manages to convince the tiger, and indirectly, it helps the protagonist, who has no idea what he's talking about. But now his attention focuses quickly on the sickening scene in front of him, seeing the seats of warriors turned into ghosts, forcibly serving a god. The tiger gloats with pride, but for Chan, it's a disgusting sight. The scene also enrages the Twilight Owl, who demands an explanation from the ruler of the void. He only observes his creation with pride. The Twilight Owl is upset by the influence the tiger has had on the human world, making a plea for justice. He asks the protagonist to give peace to the victims of the experiments and to destroy the facilities created by the Pearl. The offer includes an appropriate reward for the results, which excites the protagonist, who thinks that he might even receive authority from the goddess Minerva. However, the excitement turns into a crossroads, since whether he accepts or rejects the mission, he will lose one of the gods, feeling trapped. And when he is about to reject the mission, he stops at the last moment to ask something of the Tiger of Difficulties, making a request. He decides to listen. Chan states that he knows why he was brought there, requesting to be direct. However, the protagonist decides to do the opposite, keeping his true intentions ambiguous. To keep both sponsors playing with this, he claims his intention is to steal the secrets of the place, and that he won't allow anyone else to retrieve them. But thinking to himself, he believes he has caught the tiger's attention enough, and thus won't lose him. The tiger, seeing his true determination, accepts that any fool who interferes with his plans can perish. Giving him free rein, he creates the plunder mission, in which Chan must destroy everything in his path, with the promise of a blessing. If he succeeds, with this settled, only Minerva remains, who seems satisfied with Chan's move, assuring him that she was expecting it, which the protagonist interprets as her showing off. Finally, he accepts both missions and prepares to destroy everything until the bald man of the White Tiger manages to detect him. Springing into action, he activates the 8 trigrams Eternal Fire, combining it with the illusory effect of the Spectre, which further increases his aura and generates fiery wings, terrifying them. This makes the protagonist smile, who launches himself at the soldiers as a firestorm begins to destroy everything around him, evaporating the bald men and causing a huge explosion that devastates the entire place. The flames spread, incinerating everything in their path. Some soldiers try to stop him, using their water magic from a distance, but they are also engulfed by the fire. Meanwhile, from outside, the doctor observes, confused, thinking they went overboard with how they got rid of the information from the experiments. He jumps just before a situation occurs. As his assistant looks on in terror, the doctor asks how many men he has left, but there is no answer. And from the facility, he sees a small group of bald men who seem to have emerged safe and sound, until the system informs them that they have been poisoned by fire. Terrified and unable to do anything, they burn from the inside out, catching fire. At that moment, Chan arrives to attack, but the sole survivor, the doctor, dodges. He even manages to block one of the protagonist's attacks. This leaves him confused, a state shared by the doctor, who asks him who sent him and how he uses the Spectre's flames. Given this, Chan decides to calm down. The doctor realizes who he is facing and decides to work with Chan to form a clan stronger than the White Tiger. But Chan ignores him, causing him to get angry and attack. He launches slashes of light with his sword. Chan must dodge quickly, noticing that each one of them deactivates his stealth abilities. He barely manages to block the doctor, who becomes enraged, his face transformed. He recognizes him as a divine warrior. They exchange blows, while the protagonist reflects that there are not only soulless soldiers, but that this has reached the executives. He is glad he accepted. These abilities increase his infernal flames, as well as his strength and dexterity, starting to push back the doctor, who can barely keep up. He's surprised that he's facing a novice, whom he sees enveloped in power. He decides to increase his own power as well, activating the tiger's calamity and absorbing spectral energy. Yang awaits the attack, which consists of multiple sword slashes that he must dodge at full speed. He recognizes it as a violent attack, worthy of the tiger's calamity. his problems increase. When a legion of bald men arrives to help the doctor, all of them are divine warriors, and to protect himself, he mixes his blood poison with his infernal fire, forming a barrier. However, the warriors easily break through it, leaving Chan surprised. He admits that if this continues, it won't end well, deciding to apply a classic move, escape, or so it seems. Using his abilities, he manages to calm down and devise a plan. And when the soldiers think they have him cornered, the doctor notices something suspicious. The protagonist has led them to a narrow place to confront them head on. He orders his men to duck, but it's too late as they are easily cut to pieces, while Yang executes multiple sword movements and uses his authority. Bui's eye. He leaves all the rivals in front of him in pieces. The massacre is such that even the house cat feels that he's overdoing it. And now Chan sees how the doctor surprises him by grabbing him by the neck. He asks him to surrender, but receives a mocking smile in response, followed by the release of the Hell Sin Sword from the rune on his hand, along with the dragon tooth. Using Howl, he makes both twin swords resonate loudly. Here it's explained that the divine blacksmith, Jesse, established his position by creating a pair of masterpieces. Then another demonic brother named Toady, to establish his eternal position, also created his own masterpieces, once again being recognized among the gods as opposing forces. However, it could never be proven who was the best of these craftsmen, since their objectives and eras were different, preventing them from coming into conflict. Gansheng has the opportunity to prove who is better, carrying a sword from each blacksmith. And now, releasing the seal of the dragon tooth, he pushes the doctor away from him. Astonished, he watches as the dragon dagger increases in size, filling with power in the protagonist's hands. The system announces that he will be able to awaken some abilities, although some requirements are still missing. Wielding his power, Chan clashes both swords and, using them as twin swords, takes a deep breath, ready to attack. He gains the sword mastery skill, surprising the divine thrones with his ability to easily unlock the weapon. And the Twilight Owl asks him to impart justice with the demonic sword. Mephisto takes an interest in the swords, and the tiger is surprised by the new fangs. As the protagonist prepares to attack, a terrified doctor, who, thanks to his beastly senses, knows he must dodge the next attack or he will die, Shang unleashes a huge flash from his sword, engulfing the place in flames and trapping the doctor, who barely survives amidst the flames. Then, the sadistic divine sword whispers to him that he must be even more cruel. Easily convinced, Shang decides to test what else he can do with his other sword, unleashing another wave of fire. The doctor barely resists, but his sword shatters, leaving the doctor with only one option. With both swords shining, the protagonist feels proud of them. Seeing the doctor's attempt to escape, he decides to cross both swords to activate his black claw, launching a brutal slash that engulfs the entire place with energy, heading directly towards the doctor. Unable to do anything, it ends in a huge explosion that leaves everything destroyed. A badly injured doctor emerges from the rubble, his body full of burns and despair. Even so, he manages to move, crawling on the ground, with a determination that intrigues the protagonist, who follows him. The doctor reaches a door, where he takes his last breath. Chan is surprised that he went to such lengths to surrender. He finally decides to enter the place, using Peter's touch again, to open the door. Inside, he finds a strange mechanism to which a person is connected. Chan uses his ability to get closer and observes the subject of the experiment, a girl he seems to recognize. She is the same Jin Yinseo, his excited fan, who he now assumes is a divine warrior. However, upon touching her, the system alerts him of an anomaly. Noticing that she is more than a divine warrior, something fundamental, he sees demons in her, monsters, goblins, and even the specter Giwi. He understands that all the experiments carried out aim to complete the power of the Gildan. He tries to determine the girl's current situation, who seems to be receiving a 41% charge of the tiger's calamity. Although this percentage is not too high, Chan observes the girl's physique and notices how her body has hardened, easily surpassing any normal player. And he is glad that at least the brainwashing hasn't taken effect. He decides to free her. The Twilight Owl asks him for help, while the tiger is surprised by his choice. The protagonist begins to release the flame, of the end of the world to purify the girl of everything inside her, including the tiger's calamity, which tries to resist but is destroyed. He manages to get Jin Yunseo physically recovered, but her body is still being attacked by the calamity. The protagonist sees that he must eliminate all the negative specters from her, leaving only the positive ones, just like with Bike. That's why she must fight for herself, leaving Chan to only wait. The tiger of difficulties mocks him, considering him soft, for not using her as a tool. But the protagonist plans to use Jin in another way. He then activates soul extortion, extracting the ashes of souls from everything that has died in the area. He also manages to absorb the tiger's calamity, using it as fuel for his flames. However, he is surprised to notice that the ruler of the void is laughing at his actions. Chan remembers that the research team was supposed to arrive at the place and realizes that probably this was the reason why Director O supported his idea of closing the dungeon, thinking that basically O not only seeks to close the dungeon, but also to get rid of his political opposition. And seeing that the tiger keeps laughing, the protagonist knows he can't waste time and grabs the girl to escape at full speed. Meanwhile, more soldiers observe the explosion in the center, where the members of the research department supposedly are. They wait for the doctor to come out quickly, but the explosion is so big that it almost reaches them, forcing them to escape. Meanwhile, Chan flies away. Just at that moment, Woojin arrives, the third in rank of the White Tiger, looking surprised at the explosion. Two of his men return, informing him. Inside, there were multiple explosions, causing a large amount of explosives to go off in the basement and the upper part. Everything is engulfed in the flames of the heavy specter. Woojin, dismayed, deduces that it was surely a trick so that, when the research group entered, they would end up trapped in the explosions. However, it was activated earlier, which confuses him, since Director O would not make that mistake. Without understanding what kind of variant caused that failure, he decides to entrust his men to continue investigating. And before leaving, he also orders them to look for the informant, and then leaves the place, seeing how his god delights in chaos, deciding that he will have to get rid of Director O on his own. Meanwhile, Beck wakes up disoriented, being greeted by Chan, who is carrying Jean in his arms. And Beck, noticing the girl, asks if that's not his wife, receiving a no as an answer. In an annoyed and uncomfortable passing blow, he tells him to better look in the mirror. Now that he's healed, he does so and is astonished to see his face. Speechless, he receives congratulations from the protagonist, which makes him cry with joy. Just at that moment, Jean starts to wake up. Chan, noticing this, observes how in a matter of seconds, the girls throw themselves into his arms, only to fall again. Confused, she thinks it's some kind of dream, which makes both guys look at each other uncomfortably. Later, after an explanation, Jean is amazed to be rescued by her idol, clearly forgetting everything she experienced during her confinement and more worried about not having said anything weird while she was asleep. Chan informs her that she didn't say anything, but notices her excitement and that she is clearly not mentally well. After seeing her calm down, Chan tells them that they must move, since they are not in a safe place. However, Jean starts asking him personal questions, like his blood type, birthday, and favorite food, which the protagonist answers quickly without understanding why. The reason is that Jean remembers all the answers from an interview he gave at a video game world championship, and she realizes that the current Chan is not the same one she admired, since he used to be an unpleasant jerk. This makes Chan think about leaving her there, but Jean quickly changes her mind, accepting that he's, and stating that that look of hatred was enough to convince her. And now, very lively, she decides to accompany him on his way. The protagonist smiles, seeing her happy, while the system indicates that he has completed the missions of both constellations, receiving his loot, 32 phantom orbs, a vial of wisdom, and the blessing of the Twilight Owl, the tiger of difficulties. However, both constellations don't know what to give him exactly, while the hunting season boasts of having given him a more suitable gift, which ends up annoying the protagonist. On the other hand, in the forest, Jin's brother runs desperately, being intercepted by a rival group that seems to have claimed that territory as their own. This group is led by Lim Woojin, boss of Mr. Lim, who, with a big smile, apologizes to the boy, understanding that he is looking for his sister and offering to help him. However, he doesn't let him pass, kindly sending him away, even though inside, Woojin is annoyed because Chan occupies second place in the ranking, while his position is too far away. Seeking to shorten the distance, he takes it out on the boy, considering him weak for not understanding that the world of players is a jungle. Jin's brother, however, uses the technique to pass at full speed, enraging Woojin, who furiously manifests his tiger aura. At the same time, he draws his sword and enters a semi-transformation. He is ready to eliminate him. Luckily, a lively Jin arrives, insulting Woojin and calling him a squid, which makes him back off, and she looks so strong that she surprises the others and her own brother, who is happy to see. Woojin is even more annoyed at being called a squid, and the girl insists, but on second thought, you look more like a dried-up sea anemone. Although she also feels that this could be an insult to those creatures, her comments are critical hits to Woojin's ego, who decides to attack her. Jin, annoyed by the attack on her brother, and by Woojin's cowardice, and those helpers who gang up on him, prepares for combat. Tying her hair, she activates her tiger's arc. Nearby, Beck asks the protagonist if they should help the girl, but the protagonist stops him, interested in observing. Noticing that, although the Gildan's influence has left the girl, she still has the tiger's calamity, which is too much power for someone like her. Power that she surprisingly controls well. He thinks that by observing more, he will be able to better understand the Gildan and its side effects. As Woojin's helpers attack, they see how their swords break. Upon impacting against Jin's tower shield, she shouts excitedly and starts moving with tiger steps, advancing directly towards them, sending them flying. Another tries to surprise her, but is met with a burst of calamity and sends him flying. And Jin unleashes her new weapon, a huge, giant axe, astonishing everyone and seeing them furious. She demands that they repeat their insults to her face, scaring her opponents and capturing the interest of the Twilight Owl. And in a matter of time, a euphoric Jin delivers heavy blows to Woojin, humiliating him with devastating attacks. Being observed by Bike, grateful for not intervening, while Chan continues to be surprised to see how the girl, although clearly her powers surpass her, has learned to use them thanks to her talent and determination. Admiring Jin and her great physical potential, he considers that if the Gildan were fully unleashed, she would be even more powerful. However, his thoughts return to director Oh, whom he suspects has great ambitions with these experiments. He decides to investigate what exactly he was looking for with them. Meanwhile, Jin knocks out a humiliated Woojin, who falls at her feet. Her brother, without understanding what has happened and not receiving any explanation, is even more confused by the arrival of Beck and Chan, whom he recognizes immediately. Jin calms her brother, telling him that it was Chan who saved her, but he still doubts who Beck is, whom he doesn't recognize. And after everything is clarified, he asks the protagonist what he will do, and he is clear the dungeon. This astonishes everyone, with Jin being the most exaggerated as always. However, her brother doesn't believe they can do it, because if they keep going, they will encounter monsters of greater difficulty, against which they have no chance. The Tiger of Difficulties supports the brother's doubts, while the hunting season fully supports the protagonist. Chan, thoughtful, smiles, which provokes laughter from the serpent of the world, who mocks that they still doubt him and his abilities. Beck immediately understands what's happening and asks him how long it will take them to clear the dungeon. To prepare what is necessary, Chan states that it will only take him a day. Unleashing his power and flying, with the flashes of his energy, he illuminates the entire mountain. Meanwhile, Woojin wakes up traumatized, believing that Jin is still hitting him, and he defends himself from imaginary blows until he calms down. Then he goes into frustrated mode, claiming that the girl must be a half-demon. Otherwise, he could easily defeat her with his skills. And he even hallucinates that he could defeat Chan himself, devising a plan to convince everyone that Jin is a half-demon so that she can be married off. And he just reaches the other members of his team. Woojin hesitates about what to do so as not to look bad in front of them. And seeing his beaten companions, he thinks about eliminating them so they don't say anything or pretending they were ambushed. And finally, he decides that both Chin and Chan are semi-demons, laughing maniacally at his plan. At that moment, it's announced that the dungeon has been cleared, leaving Joan in shock. The protagonist appears in first place in the ranking, astonishing the other instructors, who try to locate him, while the dungeon begins to close. Meanwhile, Chan poses calmly on top of the mountain, waiting for the countdown to end. The difficulty tiger congratulates him for the chaos caused. As the dungeon closes, piquing the interest of a bearded man in a field of flowers. Back in the real world, headlines highlight how the Crimson Mountain Range was cleared after 20 years by Tyranno. This leaves everyone below his skill level, sparking discussions about how he achieved it, despite even the best of the White Tiger giving up. Many speculate about conspiracies, while the protagonist's fans defend him. Even the White Tiger speaks out, stating that it will provide an official report. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his retinue seem to be giving explanations to the instructors, who don't seem happy at all, becoming aggressive. They are calmed by a violent blow from Junko, who appears unexpectedly, stating that he will take the boy, unwilling to listen to complaints or investigations, leaving the instructor like a scolded dog, while taking Chan and his retinue. On the way, Chin, like a true fan, praises the protagonist. His brother, on the other hand, admits that although he saw him as a braggart, he kept his word to clear the dungeon in one day, accepting that despite all his power, he doesn't understand how he did it. Junko enters and prepares the group to take the protagonist, treating him very well during the journey. However, Chan is unsure where they are taking him, since they are clearly not going to Oh Young's office. Very excitedly, he informs him that they are going to the meeting center, where the clan leader asks to see them in person. This worries the protagonist, who knows he will face Mun-sun. But before that, he meets with a not at all happy Oh, who looks at him with much more suspicion than expected. Chan understands that Oh has great suspicions of him, since the research center exploded shortly before the dungeon closed. Furthermore, one is fine, and the librarian reported that he acted on Chan's orders. And so, to avoid raising suspicion, he greets Oh normally, thanking him for his support. Oh states that everything was thanks to the protagonist's skills, but also mentions that this has brought him many problems, since all the group leaders are interested in recruiting him, and also want to discuss how the reward he earned in the dungeon will be divided. And they have even received inquiries at the international level from the board of directors. Finally, he asks if he has changed his mind. The protagonist states that he maintains his decision to resign if he is not assigned to the division he requested. Oh accepts. Oh warns that the clan leader will not let him go so easily. Just then, the summons arrives for both of them to proceed to the meeting room. Finally entering the place, Chan's viper eyes begin to glow, as do his out-of-control beast senses. Feeling a presence that makes him think that it's the first time he's met someone truly dangerous since his return. And so he follows Oh through a rainbow towards the blue flower garden, where they explain that the meeting room is inside a dungeon. As they walk, Chan notices a strange figure on the ceiling. Watching them, Oh addresses this figure directly, stating that he fulfilled his order to bring the boy. With a single glance, Mun-sun surprises the protagonist, who recognizes him as Tyranno. His god seems to have a lot of interest in the Twilight Owl. He senses that the situation will become serious, as Chan sits terrified, understanding that he is basically being threatened. Mun-sun's aura envelopes the place, causing the protagonist's system to alert him about the danger. His beast senses go haywire, remembering that his plan from the beginning was to attract the attention of several gods, risking provoking the jealousy of their devotees. And although he is in a critical situation, similar to the one he experienced in Arcadia, he decides to calm down and introduce himself. This makes Mun-sun see him as someone courteous. The protagonist tells him that being in the presence of a 9th-generation swordsman amuses him, stating that many months ago, he didn't think he would make it this far. Nervous, he awaits Mun-sun's response, hoping he will take pity on his past life, making himself look like a simple novice, and stroking his ego by threatening a simple boy like him. Without moving a muscle, he wonders if he will attack him. He analyzes that his rival is at level 90, which makes him a problem, but he also believes he could defeat him, especially with the help of the gods interested in him. Even without them, he is confident that he could find a way to succeed. And while he reflects, Mun-sun appears beside him without him noticing, filling him with fear. Mun-sun whispers in his ear that his patron has given him a gift that he must pick up from the director. The protagonist, confused, feels that in the end it wasn't a direct threat from Mun-sun, who doesn't even see him as a worthy rival due to his connection with the ruler of the void, thinking that perhaps It has to do with the 7 sacred scriptures, which is how the ruler of the void was able to grant him enormous power. Considering that the experiments could be designed to achieve something big, he tries to deduce it with his viper eyes, observing how Mun's son is enveloped in a true tiger calamity, far above Gildal. However, his gaze alerts the old man, who imposingly demands that he stop snooping, only to terrify Chan, before retreating through a huge door of light. And so the protagonist apologizes before he leaves. As he watches Mun's son's flash of light disappear, a new exit also appears beside him. He understands that, although he is above the results of the experiments, the divine warriors are only incomplete versions that are below the potential of Mun's Sunday. With this, he understands that the ruler of the void was only playing with him to observe his reaction, and Mun's son simply played along. And now he sees that the ruler of the void has a loyal, powerful, and ambitious sword in Mun's son. Later, Chan returns with Jun and Director O. The latter tells him that their leader is someone very special. The protagonist, agreeing, recognizes that Mun's son is on another level. He also deduces that Gildal's experiments were nothing more than fragments of Mun's son's power. The director admits that he doesn't fully understand his leader either. Meanwhile, Jun complains that he doesn't like going to the confession room because it gives him chills down his spine. Then comes the important part. His reward, the hunting season. Jun proudly states that nothing beats his gifts. While the Twilight Owl watches attentively, O presents him with 2 options, an armory or a library, both of the 2nd rank. This excites Jun, who asks him to share the weapons if he chooses the armory. The director observes the protagonist so calmly that he assumes he already expected the reward. However, Chan claims to be surprised, although his face says otherwise. But in reality, he thinks that given the difficulty of the mission, he would receive something better. The old man asks him if he has chosen yet. The protagonist plans to use the library to learn more skills, but before he can decide, the director asks him if it's true that he still hasn't chosen a patron. This revelation greatly disturbs Jung, stating that it's impossible for someone to have come this far without a patron. He insists on this again and again, for Chan to say it's a lie, with the protagonist silent, making them uncomfortable. He admits it's true. Jung is incredulous, now uncomfortably watching how the protagonist, without a patron, has achieved such power. He thinks about the destructive force he will be once he has won, seeing him as someone crazy. And now, the protagonist knows well that the tiger is interested in him. But contrary to what he wants, Chan is not interested in being the tiger's apostle, nor in any of the several gods he has rejected. This seems arrogant to the old man. The boy doesn't back down, stating that he's not interested in the idea of his reward, being a mere apostle, when he already has many benefits, without being one. This upsets them, especially the difficulty tiger, who wants to become violent. He is stopped by the hunting season and the Twilight Owl, who managed to calm him down. Director O, seeing that overflowing greed of youth, cheerfully says, with a threatening look, that those decisions will doom him someday. With Chan responding with the same look, causing the director to calm down, escorting him to the 1st floor, and reminding him that their god is not tolerant, and that if he can't have him, surely no one will. And so the 3 continue on their way. While Jun, wanting to cheer him up, suggests that if he stays with them, it will be very entertaining. He then goes after the old man as if he were his grandfather, leaving Chan looking at them like trash. Later, the librarian gives him a tour of the 2nd-rate library, which can only be accessed with a special key, which will really hinder the protagonist's plans. And his slave has no more information, so now he enters the chambers, which are a special space, with many levitating doors, which are offered to the protagonist in exchange for becoming the apostle of the Tiger Chan. With no intention of accepting, he walks through the doors, reading their tiger titles. From the Swift Tiger, Half-Blind White Bell Tiger, Mountain Saint Tiger, Divided Tiger, and surprisingly, the last one, the most random, being the Nightmare Devouring Beast. They all come from the teachings of the tiger. They're the proud paths to its power, only having access to one unless he becomes its apostle. To Chan, this seems irritating and absurd, because they were planning to take all of that for him anyway. Choosing only one, he inserts the key, confusing the tiger, who criticizes him for his choice. This causes the world serpent to call him an airhead, annoying him, and offering Chan another chance at another door. But the decision is made, taking the path of the half-blind tiger, which according to Chan is a one-eyed tiger that compensates for its lack of vision with its strength and aggression. A choice that, clearly, the tiger did not expect him to make as the door opens. He thinks it will be very useful to combine it with his own abilities, considering that he could enter the other doors later with Pedro's key. However, he doesn't want to risk himself further, deciding to look for another way to steal the secrets of the ruler of the void. And so, while his group waits for him, China is too desperate because he hasn't returned, which makes her brother uncomfortable. He tells her to calm down, because that guy is too strong for anything to happen to him. But for her, he's no longer a tyrant, but a prince, being so infatuated that she makes her brother nauseous. He complains about her, and also about Bike's cold silence, seeing how he underwent a transformation out of nowhere, thinking that the protagonist is hiding something, and whether it's good or bad, he must know. To protect the embarrassingly infatuated girl he has for his sister. Embarrassingly infatuated girl he has for his sister. In his pensive state, piques the interest of the world serpent, which begins to speak to him, assuring him that no matter how much he thinks about it, he won't find the answer. The boy understands that it's referring to the protagonist, being precisely the reason why the divine throne became interested in him, offering him a proposal to return him to his priest if he ever needs him. But his surprised look changes upon hearing Hyun's voice, who seems happy to see them. And even though his brother remembers how he left him to his fate after his sister was kidnapped, she, knowing nothing, gets excited and runs to hug him, or not. It turns out to be a bait and switch, as he passes by the boy to go for Chan, to the mockery of the brother. However, the boy doesn't react in any way, holding Chin tightly, whom he scolds for now having a new boy. Chin sees him as an annoying boy that he could easily exterminate, preferring to do so and continue acting cute. This causes Hyun to get angry and threatening towards Chan. He responds by moving at full speed to grab him by the neck before everyone's eyes. Yin tries to make him let go, but his terror only increases upon seeing the protagonist's snake-like eyes. Then he also perceives his gigantic one-eyed tiger aura floating around him as if he were his prey, just inches from his face. He looks directly at him, using his abilities to instill fear, causing Hyun to start crying like a baby to the point of wetting his pants to everyone's discomfort, leaving the boy almost lifeless on the floor. This doesn't seem to diminish Chin's excitement at all. She, along with the others, follows the protagonist. She asks him if they're going to eat something. Yang denies it, since right outside there is a huge number of reporters asking them questions about dungeons and their contracts. The girl understands that he is very used to fame, receiving offers from all over the world, and yet choosing that clan, leaving her confused. But still, taking advantage of the moment when the whole group ends up attracting the attention of the press. Ignoring all the questions and compliments, they reach a limousine. It comes with a driver included, so they all travel luxuriously in silence, until Chan asks Chin's brother what he wanted to tell him before. He is surprised that he noticed, admitting that he's not good at hiding things. Letting out a heavy sigh, he asks him if he knows the divine being, the world serpent, surprising his sister and the serpent herself, who complains about being mentioned. Chan knows very well who it is, being one of his suitor gods. So the brother confesses that that being asked him to watch and report the protagonist's every move. The serpent is disappointed that her plan ended so quickly, and Chin, very upset, pulls her brother's cheeks for not telling her as soon as he was spoken to, making a scene. But the protagonist doesn't look annoyed at all, to the siblings' joy. It was the boy who expected a worse reaction. Chan knows that he hasn't discovered anything, which the boy confirms. And in that case, he didn't do anything that caused him trouble, but he's interested in knowing what the god offered him. In return, the serpent looks somewhat embarrassed, listening as the sister states that the deal was that she would teach him black magic, surprising the protagonist, who, upon hearing a bit of the explanation, agrees to be monitored, surprising everyone, even the divine being. The protagonist knows that the serpent's black magic is based on one of the best formulas called Ouroboros, being very difficult to learn, and even worse if done without a guide, seeing that the proposal implies that the serpent saw talent in the boy, who can't believe it. Although the serpent doesn't let him feel too important, Chan allows him to accept the deal, leaving the siblings on a street to continue on their way. The brother states that his weird sister has become a fan of the protagonist. With her very excited, she states that he should ask if he needs to know anything about him, to which the boy replies that he will become a fan, not a crazy stalker, which earns him a kick in the leg. Back in the limousine, Chan and the World Serpent argue about their hidden plans, with him being the first to seemingly take advantage of his information, making the brother learn that complicated magic so that he can learn it himself afterward. Now, the next thing is to drop Beck off at his house. However, he doesn't really believe that he has a house. The boy tries to affirm it, to which Chan decides to get the truth out of him, threatening him with his brute force, causing the boy to prefer to come clean, admitting that he traded his home for weapons. The protagonist, seeing him unobligated, smilingly asks him to stay at his home, making Beck blush. It seems he will give him a makeover first, as they arrive at a luxurious apartment, where he is greeted by his mother, who didn't expect him back so soon. He tells her that he finished training faster than expected. She is sorry for not having anything homemade to eat, insisting on preparing something for him. Chan accepts, but first he has a slightly more complicated request, introducing his new adoptee. Guest Beck, fully suited up, being introduced as his friend. He is greeted by his mother with a big smile, asking him to make himself at home. Beck is very surprised not only by the welcome, but also by the ridiculously large and luxurious house where Chan lives. They happen to pass by the huge TV, where they are broadcasting the breaking news of the victory in the dungeon of the tyrant and his group. This makes Beck a little nervous to see himself on television, until his blushing gaze focuses on a girl, very comfortably lying on the sofa, eating squid. She is startled to see the boys, quickly getting up to change the channel, pretending that she was watching it by accident. This is the protagonist's sister, who, even though he didn't really say anything, angrily goes to her room, yelling to her mother that she doesn't want dinner. This leaves the mother uncomfortable because of her temperament, wondering who she inherited it from, and revealing that the girl was very worried and kept up with all the news regarding her brother, causing her to come out again just to deny it. So Chan lets them argue alone. While he takes Beck to his room, he is surprised by how big it is. The protagonist asks that from now on, he call him brother so that he stops sounding so formal. And he agrees, seeing that his room is bigger than his previous house. It awakens even more pity in Chan regarding Church's parenting. The boy admires all of the protagonist's things, especially the video games, allowing him to play for the first time in his life. Then he takes a bath, which he also finds luxurious, and enjoys the luxurious dinner, which he is very excited about, thanking the protagonist's mother, who is very happy to see someone so excited about her food. Beck ends up crying from emotion upon tasting the first bite, suggesting that she open a restaurant. It makes the mother emotional to hear such lovely compliments that end up putting her favoritism into question. Quickly back at the house, faced with the protagonist's coldness, this makes them think about adopting Bike to replace their cold son, making the boy blush even more, smiling as he goes to serve him another plate. His smile awakens a hidden memory in Bike's mind. The faint and distant memory of his mother laughing. He becomes nostalgic, something Chan doesn't miss. So at bedtime, he asks Bike if he's comfortable. Despite sleeping on the floor, he is. However, the protagonist knows well that something is wrong and asks him what it is. The boy can't find a way to say it, because he basically feels he doesn't have the right to be so happy. At that moment, Chan understands, stating that no one should give him that right. Rather, he must take it and define his own worth. If he continues feeling pathetic, he will crash, while if he values himself, it will elevate him and he will be able to take whatever he wants. Seeing the boy smiling, he remembers his past self, when he became a ghost with a hunger for fighting. With this, he admits that he let that memory decide his worth, preventing him from seeing his true value and crashing into a rock, sinking into despair. He thinks that's exactly what one would want for Bike, whom he sees in such a paternal way that he wonders if he is doing his friend's job, and at the same time wondering where he is. It was the season of hunting, feeling a lump in his throat from the sad scene, while the Twilight Owl recognizes him as a sentimentalist. Meanwhile, downstairs, his sister talks to their mother about how Chan, aka the loser, has changed a lot since he encountered the Jasmine Gate, noting that he's no longer a baby, controlling his temper, and not falling for her provocations. Her mother sarcastically notes the quality of the girl's brotherly affection, who thinks the protagonist is now like an old man. But the moment becomes tense as she catches her mother's attention when she tells her mother that what has changed most about that boy is that he used to be lonely, and now he shows up with an angelic-faced friend, which annoys her mother, who gives her several consecutive slaps. As the girl complains, when she manages to calm her down, she says something more important. Her mother preparing her hand for when she says something foolish, which she does by stating that Beck is exactly her type, and tells her to ask him if he has a girlfriend. Of course, she receives another slap just as the boys appear. The girl tries to go from messy to beautiful in seconds. Chan states that he will go train with his friend, and his mother asks him not to overtrain, something that is seconded by his now miraculously affectionate sister, making Chan very uncomfortable and surprising. But later, both walk outside the building. The boy asks his brother where they are going. Chan tells him they're going for new weapons, to the boy's usual complaints about not having money. But now, the protagonist will basically be his sugar daddy, stating that they need a weapon suitable for his worth, as well as armor and gems, preparing him well to test it later. Meanwhile, Chan reflects on how, when he met him, it was his first turning point, thinking that another one may be approaching. He arrives at old Jesse's, who complains about him asking for another weapon again. However, he is silenced with money. When he tries to complain, he is silenced with more money, astounding the blind man, who sees his enormous bank account. We see how his clothes have changed to pure luxury and gold, both for him and his little dog. Convinced by the money, he finally agrees. Bike overhears the amount of money, increasing his respect for the protagonist, who wants Jesse to call him sir. In accordance with this, Jesse agrees, calling him CEO bastard and awaiting his new orders. Chan asks for a spear, making Jesse prefer to crack open his CEO's head than to work on another damn spear. This time, Chan asks for something simpler in length and weight. Although he forgets that he's talking to a blind man who only sees money, he tries to explain it to him with gestures, until, after Jesse complains, he gives him Bike's spear as a reference. As for Jesse, he takes it in his hands, and is confused by the weight and asks to feel the boy's arm. He immediately starts touching his whole body, understanding, just by touch, the entire fighting style of the boy's spear. He describes it as circular movements that mainly use spins and centrifugal force. Inspired now to create the weapon, Jesse agrees and asks about the materials. These are very difficult to obtain, so he asks for 15 days. The CEO wants it in 10, and like any bad negotiation, Jesse ends up accepting the 10 days annoyed. Later, Beck is happy that he will have his own weapon, but he loses focus because he is nervous. Chan suggests that he not overthink it, since they are about to train for this. He gets the attention of the hunting season and the Twilight Owl, although he loses the tigers, who only enjoys fights to the death. Chan knows he will return at some point and begins his lesson, asking Beck if the phantom power is not giving him problems. Bike confirms it and asks him why. The protagonist explains that his power should not be used like normal magic, since those born as phantoms are half shaman and half phantom, managing to obtain attributes like demonic and evil energy. However, now Bike is no longer half phantom. He states that the only way to correct it is to use a completely different energy flow method, changing both his breathing and his daily habits. Chan decides that he must make the boy master shadow energy, seeking to make him like his father. And so his training begins, releasing a large beam of light. He utters the phrase semi-shadow, returning to his past. When he met Church, he claimed that he wasn't a physical form, but rather a non-existent god, something that amazed the protagonist, since very few can detect him. Church explained to him that the only reason he has a physical body is because he stole his shadow and then imbued it to make a magical shell. And Chan, moving at full speed, was annoyed because he felt that he was being taken advantage of. The Great Shadow observed his angry expression, but accepted that it was something like that. Returning to the present, the protagonist observes that his son's attentive gaze is very similar to his father's. And now, ready to learn, Chan begins his first lesson, learning to control the energy of his shadow. He explains that shadows must be handled differently through a path suitable for them. He asks him to channel his temperament into the shadows and try to pull his own. Beck focuses on doing it, listening as Chan suggests that he not do it forcefully, but as if he were unraveling each part thread by thread. Beck manages to partially move the shadow, but fails at the last moment. Due to losing focus, he is scolded and encouraged to try again. Concentrating again, this time he manages to lift the shadow. However, it looks like an uncontrolled monster going towards him. A worried Chan tells him not to let it consume him, but it's too late. The boy begins to be surrounded by shadows. Frightened to see how the shadows can flick, Beck feels scared, but backed by something inside him. And at that moment, a more deformed and terrifying version of himself appears, who decides to help him for the survival of both, managing to take the advantage and absorb the shadow that was attacking him. This being is precisely the one that Beck had rejected in his mind, who, now furious at seeing him so weak, after rejecting him, demands that he take responsibility. This makes the boy touch the shadows, which form a menacing face. Beck understands the shadow and ends up merging with, gaining the shadow puppeteer ability, capable of manipulating shadows and other hidden abilities that the system cannot fully identify. Chan observes how the boy is enveloped in a gigantic shadow armor, which the system also cannot recognize. Inside there, Beck, still confused, sees how the system indicates that much of the form is due to Chan's replica, who suggests he imitate the player more to learn his movements. Seeing this, Chan Ki explains that shadow energy is imitation, so he must look for something to imitate. Beck understands that this is the reason why Chan gave him his shadow. The protagonist smiles, confirming it, and tells him that he will understand more as he imitates, asking him to pay close attention. While he shows off with his spear, he begins to make a series of movements that Beck observes carefully, while the constellations applaud with admiration, except for the tiger, who has returned to see if Beck has learned his teachings well. The protagonist, in response, pulls out his best moves, ending in a dazzling pose that satisfies the constellation. And Beck, completely confused, sees how the system cannot analyze the movements. Nervous, he follows Chan's instructions and raises his spear. The tiger is sad because he has mastered his techniques well, but rejected the rest of the doors. And as if it were a challenge, the protagonist generates a huge one-eyed tiger aura that floods the environment. This aura roars with imposing force, and the tiger watches carefully how his ability evolves from one-eyed tiger to now ferocious tiger. We cut directly to the White Tiger headquarters, where there is a meeting of directors regarding the EB-0FF. Many directors are discussing the number of problems facing the EB-0FF and how the rookie's initiation training hasn't even finished. So they will have to look for a new method, and several look at Director Wong, who remains very calm and smiling. Then a redhead named Yun intervenes, suggesting putting all the problems together, proposing to send those who were absent to prove themselves in training, and to get rid of the EB-0FF as well. Director O considers the idea interesting, but doubts its suitability, or if it could bring more problems by sending rookies on such an operation. He consults the executive plan with the team leader, 3 Park. He gives the go-ahead, stating that if they can't handle this mission, they are unlikely to be White Tiger material. And so, making the decision to combine the training with the annihilation plan, they send the trainees to qualify them, except for Chan, who will be sent to the Future Strategy Center, arousing everyone's bewilderment and Wong's interest. Later, everyone leaves, but Director O stops Wong to ask him directly if he has some stupid plan behind this. He denies it, trying to gain the old man's trust, who tells him that, honestly, for him, subordinates are disposable tools. However, he admits that there is one tool he really likes, and that if he were to damage it, it would make him feel bad. Wong, terrified, kneels down, banging his head against the floor, begging him to believe him, and assuring him that he will take care of that tool. All this is observed with O's terrifying gaze. Later, Yun arrives at his office with blood on his face, which his son notices. Hyun, whom his father entrusts with eliminating Chan. At first, it was only for the humiliation he caused him in his pants, but now he sees him as a problem that will overshadow him again and again in his goal of reaching the top. Hyun understands that he must toughen up, ready to eliminate Chan and also the girl who rejected him, who precisely also humiliated someone he plans to use. Joan, Meanwhile, the protagonist continues to display his tiger technique, which causes the divine being to scold him. Upon seeing how he took another of his techniques, his surprise increases when it is revealed that now he also possesses the power of the ferocious tiger and the city tiger. The first has characteristics of brutality like the previous one, and it is said that whoever is attacked by its temperament will not survive. He also has the form of the wise tiger, which increases wisdom, speed, and quick thinking. The serpent of the void is condescending towards the tiger for having given him one of those abilities, because once he did, Chan took the others by force. Seeing the situation, the serpent calls him a loser, with no right to be angry. All the other constellations agree, except for the hunting season, who is a little lost, not knowing what they're talking about. This leaves the tiger furious at being defeated. The protagonist, although he sees them all as idiots, admits that he is right, understanding that the ruler of the void will not let him go so easily. Meanwhile, he watches as Beck continues to imitate his tiger aura very quickly, letting him practice while he thinks about testing an item he took from the Silver Fox Research Center, a scroll made of human skin and filled with hundreds of sealed curses. Try to analyze it. He remembers that he found it where the Yilden was manufactured. Assuming it has to do with the sacred structures, he intuits that it must be very powerful. However, his desire to explore its interior is fulfilled in a bad way when he notices that it is releasing the calamity of the royal tiger. This is completely unleashed throughout the place, with the tiger happy to see him in trouble. The protagonist gets angry with O for having left something so important lying around like that, and the calamity begins to envelop the place, seeming to try to devour him. Chan, with no options, begins to be enveloped in despair. Resigned, he sees that he only has one way out, to use Peter's key. But although he didn't want the ruler of the void to discover this, with no other options, he reveals it to reseal the scroll. Barely standing, he sees how the secrets of the scroll are released in front of him. However, these inscriptions twist to escape the paper, enveloping the protagonist, who has just acquired the fourth of the scriptures of Saint V, which tries to help him, but the protagonist stops it. Beck understands and stays behind. Chan notices that he managed to obtain the fourth scripture, which could possess him if he doesn't control his power well. And without discovering all its effects except for wisdom, he understands that O discovered this scroll and kept it secret, creating the false Yilden with it. While pondering what to do, the demon of the abyss shows his interest, awaiting a response from Chan, who had forgotten that Mephisto was also interested in him. Seeing how now, the demon offers him a deal to decipher the contents of the scroll, enveloping the protagonist in a strong beam. All the other gods are surprised. The furious tiger and the very interested hunting season see how the runes of the scroll adhere to the protagonist's body, allowing him to read it, discovering inside a kind of poem for the believers of a god, which contains the method of invoking him, although he cannot fully interpret it. But upon reading it, a mission is unlocked to find the missing part of the scroll, a path hidden in the starlight, where he must decipher all the scriptures. If he fails, his mind will be contaminated. The reward for achieving it is to receive the starlight. And remembering Munsu, Chan thinks that's how he obtained that power. So to achieve it, he must now carry out the search in order to have the power of the divine stars and surpass the warrior of God and Yilden. Determined, he asks Beck to stay there and not allow anyone else to enter. Beck hesitates at first, but accepts, seeing how his lying brother hides so many secrets, but still decides to support him, being like his shadow, following him without hesitation. And so, Chan is invited to the Tiger's Calamity Dungeon. The Owl of Twilight grants him the pending reward, merging the two abilities he previously gave him. Chan, smiling, is absorbed by the calamity, being transported to the Reckless Demon Cave.
Season 1 of the series ends here. Everyone, if you find it interesting, please comment on this video so I can continue with Season 2 of this series. Thank you everyone.